They say a mother's voice can heal any wound. Rosalie's mother had a voice like honey over gravel, sweet but scarred, beautiful but broken. Every night, she sang the same lullaby, her fingers threading through Rosalie's copper hair, her breath warm against her daughter's temple. The melody was older than the pack itself, passed down through generations of their bloodline. A song that belonged to the women who came before. But the night her mother died poisoned by wolfsbane meant for another. The song changed. Rosalie had been hiding in the root cellar when she heard it. Her mother's voice, growing weaker with each note, climbing through the floorboards like smoke. The lullaby twisted in her mother's throat, the final verse morphing into something else entirely. Not the gentle resolution Rosalie had known all her life, but a warning wrapped in melody. A curse disguised as comfort. A promise that would take 12 years, 3 rejections, and 1 monstrous king to finally understand. The last note hung in the air like a held breath, and then silence. Rosalie learned that night that some songs don't end. They just wait in your bones until the world is ready to hear them again. Chapter 1. The Third Rejection. The scent of her own humiliation had a particular texture. Rosalie had learned to recognize it over the years, sharp like iron, bitter like burnt cedar, with an underlying sweetness that made it worse somehow. It clung to her skin now as she stood in the center of the Moonridge Pack's ceremonial grounds, 300 pairs of eyes boring into her back, her soon-to-be former mate's hand still raised from where he'd just struck her. Barren, Keith spat the word like it was poison on his tongue, his face handsome in that predictable way that had once made her foolish heart flutter, twisted with disgust. 3 years, Rosalie. 3 years I've wasted on you. Waiting for you to give me an heir. Waiting for you to prove you're worth the bond. The bond. Rosalie could still feel it, that golden thread that had connected her to Keith Price since the day they'd been matched by the pack elders. It pulsed weakly now, a dying thing, strangling itself as he prepared to sever it completely. This was her third rejection. The first had been Ricky. When she was 19 he'd called her defective, when the pack physician confirmed what she'd always feared. The second had been Rich. 2 years later he'd been kinder about it, at least, waiting until after the failed fertility treatments before quietly dissolving their bond. But Keith? Keith was making a spectacle of it. You're not a wolf, he continued, his voice rising so the entire pack could hear. The full moon hung fat and silver above them, bearing witness. You're a hollow shell wearing a wolf's skin. What good is a female who can't breed? What purpose does she serve? Rosalie's hands trembled at her sides. She wanted to scream, to rage, to tear into him with the claws she could still feel beneath her skin even if her womb was empty. But she'd learned long ago that fighting only made it worse. The pack respected strength, yes, but they respected tradition more. And tradition said that a barren female had no right to protest her rejection. I, Keith Price, son of the Moonridge Alpha, reject you, Rosalie Ramirez, as my mate and bondmate. May the moon goddess have mercy on your broken bloodline. The words hit like silver bullets. Rosalie felt the bond snap, not cleanly, never cleanly, but like a rope fraying strand by strand. Pain erupted in her chest, white-hot and absolute. She'd felt this twice before, but it never got easier. If anything, it got worse, because each rejection left scar tissue that made the next one hurt more. She stumbled backward, her hand flying to her sternum as if she could hold the pieces of herself together through sheer force of will. A whimper escaped her lips. She hated herself for it, and the crowd murmured with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. Keith's new intended, a willowy blonde named Minnie with hips made for bearing and a smile sharp as knives, stepped forward to take his arm. She was already pregnant, Rosalie could smell it. That distinctive sweetness of new life that seemed to mock everything Rosalie would never have. Minnie's hand curved protectively over her still flat belly, and Keith's eyes softened when he looked at her in a way they'd never softened for Rosalie. Get her out of here, Keith said, dismissing Rosalie with a wave of his hand, like she was nothing more than garbage to be disposed of. She has until dawn to leave pack territory. If she's still here when the sun rises, she'll be considered rogue. Rogue. The word sent ice through Rosalie's veins. Rogues had no protection, no rights. They could be killed on sight by any pack, hunted for sport, or worse, captured and sold. But staying meant enduring this humiliation forever, being the pack's cautionary tale, the broken female who served as a warning to others. Rosalie's sister, Tracy, pushed through the crowd. She was everything Rosalie wasn't: fertile, bonded, respected. She'd given her mate 2 strong sons already, and another was on the way. But despite their differences, despite the growing distance between them over the years, Tracy's eyes held genuine pain as she reached for Rosalie's arm. "Come on," Tracy whispered, her voice cracking. "Let's get you home." Home. The word was a joke. Rosalie had been staying in a small cottage on the edge of pack territory, the kind of place reserved for unmated wolves or those who'd fallen from grace. It wasn't home. It had never been home. Not since the house where her mother sang had burned down 12 years ago, taking with it everything that had ever mattered. Tracy half carried Rosalie through the crowd, ignoring the whispers that followed them like wasps. Someone laughed, a high, cruel sound that Rosalie felt in her teeth. Someone else said something about defective genetics and mercy killing. Rosalie kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching her feet move one in front of the other, focusing on that simple rhythm, because if she didn't, she might actually break. The cottage appeared through the trees, small and sagging and temporary in every way that mattered. Tracy pushed open the door and guided Rosalie inside, settling her onto the worn couch that smelled like must and old fires. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tracy said, "You can't stay here." "I know." Rosalie's voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, someone hollowed out and distant. "Where will you go?" "I don't know." Tracy's hand found Rosalie's, squeezing tight. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If there was anything I could do." "There isn't." Rosalie looked at her sister. Really looked at her. Tracy's belly was just starting to show, her third child growing strong and healthy where Rosalie's womb remained eternally empty. There had been a time when that would have filled Rosalie with jealousy so sharp it could cut. Now she just felt numb. "You have your family. Your life. You can't risk them for me. You're my sister, and you're a mother." Rosalie pulled her hand away gently. "Go home, Tracy. Kiss your boys for me. Name the new one something strong." Tracy's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue. They both knew the truth. In a pack, family ties only went so far. Blood might be blood, but an unmated, barren female was a liability no one could afford to carry. Tracy stood slowly, hesitating at the door. "The old stories," she said suddenly. "The ones Mother used to tell us. About the Crimson Throne and the Cursed King. Do you remember?" Rosalie frowned. "Why?" "Because there are rumors." Tracy glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid someone might hear even here. "About the Alphaking. They say he's changed, that he's become something monstrous. They say he's offering a fortune to any pack that can provide him with a—" She stopped, biting her lip. "With a what?" "A sacrifice," Tracy whispered. "A female to break his curse. They say he doesn't care about bloodlines or breeding anymore. He just needs someone brave enough or desperate enough to face him." Rosalie's heart began to beat faster. "That's insane. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have nothing left to lose." Tracy's voice was urgent now, almost pleading. "And because I heard Mother's song last night. In my dreams, the one she used to sing to us. And in the dream she was looking at you, Rosalie. Only you." A chill ran down Rosalie's spine. She hadn't thought about her mother's lullaby in years. She had actively tried not to think about it, because the memory was too painful, the loss too raw. But now, with Tracy's words hanging in the air, she could almost hear it again. That melody that had changed in her mother's dying moments, transforming into something sharp and strange. "That's just a dream," Rosalie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe." Tracy opened the door, moonlight spilling across the threshold. "Or maybe it's a message. The Crimson Throne is 3 days' journey north. If you're going to run anyway." She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. Then she was gone, and Rosalie was alone. The cottage settled into silence around her. Outside, she could hear the pack's celebration continuing. Keith and Minnie's bonding ceremony would go on until dawn, complete with feasting and dancing and joy that had nothing to do with Rosalie. She should start packing. She should figure out what few possessions she could carry. She should plan her route, decide which unclaimed territories might be safe for a lone wolf. Instead, she found herself humming. The melody came unbidden, rising from some deep place in her chest where it had been buried for 12 years. Her mother's lullaby, the song that had been passed down through generations of Ramirez women, each one adding their own verses, their own meaning. Rosalie's voice was rusty with disuse, cracking on the higher notes, but she couldn't stop. And as she sang, something strange happened. The air in the cottage grew thick, charged with something that felt almost like electricity. The moonlight streaming through the window seemed to brighten, focusing on Rosalie like a spotlight. And for just a moment, so brief she almost thought she'd imagined it, she could have sworn she heard a second voice harmonizing with hers. Deep, male, ancient. The song ended abruptly, and Rosalie's hand flew to her throat. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She looked around the empty cottage, but of course there was no one there. She was alone. She was always alone. But Tracy's words echoed in her mind. You have nothing left to lose. It was true. 3 rejections meant no pack would take her. Her barren status meant no mate would want her. She had no home. No family who could claim her without risking their own standing. No future except wandering until she either found an unclaimed territory or died trying. Or she could go north. To the Crimson Throne. To the Alpha King who had become a monster and needed someone desperate enough to face him. Rosalie stood slowly, her body aching from the rejection's aftermath, and moved to the small wooden chest where she kept her few possessions. At the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth that had yellowed with age, was her mother's journal. Rosalie had never been able to bring herself to read it, the loss was too fresh, even after 12 years. But she pulled it out now, her hands shaking. The leather cover was soft with age, the pages brittle. She opened it carefully, and her mother's handwriting sprawled across the first page in fading ink. To my daughter. When she is ready to sing the ending. Rosalie's breath caught. She flipped through the pages, seeing fragments of the lullaby written out in musical notation, with annotations in the margins. Her mother had been documenting the song, adding notes about its origins, its meaning. And there, near the back of the journal, was a passage that made Rosalie's blood run cold. The Song of Binding was created 5 centuries ago by the first Ramirez seer. It was meant to tether 2 souls across time, ensuring that when the world needed them most, they would find each other. The song is incomplete without both voices, the shield and the sword, the bearer and the keeper, one to sing it, one to answer, both to complete it. If you are reading this, my daughter, it means I am gone. It means the time has come for you to understand. Your barrenness is not a curse, it is a preparation. You were never meant to bear children of the flesh. You were meant to bear something far more important. Go north when the 3rd moon rejects you. Go to the Crimson Throne. Go to the king who has forgotten himself, and sing him back. The journal fell from Rosalie's hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. 3 rejections. The 3rd moon, Keith was the beta's son, 3rd in line to the pack leadership, her mother had known. Somehow, impossibly, she had known. Rosalie's mind reeled, trying to process what she'd just read. A binding song, 2 souls, the shield and the sword. It sounded like the old stories, the fairy tales her mother had told her before bed, mixing them with the lullaby until Rosalie couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But fairy tales weren't real, curses weren't real, monsters weren't. A howl split the night, so loud and so close that Rosalie felt it in her bones. But it wasn't a wolf's howl. It was something else, something wrong, something that made every instinct in her body scream danger. She ran to the window and looked out toward the forest. In the distance, just visible in the moonlight, she saw smoke rising. Black and thick and unnatural. Another howl, and this time she recognized it for what it was. A death cry. Something was attacking the pack. Or someone. Rosalie's hand found the journal again, clutching it to her chest. She had a choice to make. And she had to make it now. Stay and die with a pack that had rejected her. Or run north, toward a throne painted crimson, toward a king who had become a monster, toward a song that might be her only purpose in a world that had declared her purposeless. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, "Sing him back." Rosalie grabbed her travel pack, threw in the journal, and what few supplies she could carry, and slipped out the back door into the forest. Behind her, the pack's screams were rising, mixing with that terrible not wolf howling. She didn't look back. She ran north, toward the Crimson Throne, toward her destiny. Or her doom. The lullaby hummed in her bones with every step, and for the first time in 12 years, Rosalie Ramirez felt like she was finally going home. Chapter 2. The Journey North. The forest had teeth. Rosalie had always known this, every wolf did, but she'd never truly understood it until now. When you traveled with a pack, the wilderness bent around you, respecting the collective strength, the shared power. Alone, the forest saw you differently. It saw prey. She'd been running for 6 hours straight, her wolf form eating up miles with desperate efficiency, when the first stalker found her scent. A rogue male, judging by the rank smell that preceded him, unwashed, feral, dangerous in the way that comes from having nothing left to lose. Rosalie had pushed harder, veering east toward the river where the water might mask her trail, but he'd been persistent. It wasn't until she'd crossed into neutral territory, the dead zone between packlands where no wolf had claimed, that he'd finally given up. Or perhaps he'd simply sensed what she was beginning to feel. Something larger was watching. Something that made even desperate rogues think twice. Dawn found Rosalie in her human form again, huddled beneath a rocky overhang, shivering despite the thick traveling cloak she'd thrown over her torn dress. The rejection wound in her chest still throbbed with every heartbeat. A phantom pain where Keith's bond had been severed. It would fade eventually, the first two had, but for now it felt like breathing through broken glass. She pulled her mother's journal from her pack, the oilcloth damp with morning dew. In the pale light, her mother's handwriting seemed almost alive, the ink catching the sun in ways that made the words shimmer. Rosalie flipped past the passage she'd read last night, searching for more answers, and found a map sketched on one of the middle pages. The Crimson Throne sat at the northern edge of what had once been the United Territories. Before the Great Fracturing had split the wolf packs into dozens of smaller factions. The throne itself was built into the side of Mount Kale, a massive fortress carved from red stone that gave the place its name. According to her mother's notes, it had stood for over 1,000 years, home to the Alpha Kings who ruled when wolves still believed in unity. But that was before the current king, before Angelo. Rosalie's finger traced the name where her mother had written it, surrounded by question marks and warnings scrawled in increasingly frantic handwriting. Angelo Chase, crowned at 25, cursed at 27. The prophets said he would unite the packs or destroy them. They were wrong. He's doing both. The curse manifests during the full moon. He becomes something between wolf and nightmare. His own guards flee. His council abandoned him. They say he's killed 17 females sent to cure him. They say he's given up on breaking it. They say he wants to become the monster. But the song knows different. The song always knows. Rosalie closed the journal with shaking hands. 17 females. Her mother's notes were at least 5 years old, which meant the number could be higher now. What was she doing? Running towards certain death because of a lullaby and a cryptic journal entry? Because her sister had a dream? Her stomach growled, interrupting the spiral of doubt. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and the rejection had burned through what little reserves she had. Rosalie dug through her pack, finding only a heel of bread and some dried meat that Tracy must have slipped in when she wasn't looking. Her eyes stung at the small kindness. She was rationing the bread when she heard voices. 2 males, from the sound of it, arguing in low tones that carried through the morning air. Rosalie's wolf instincts screamed at her to hide, but curiosity and the desperate hope that they might have supplies kept her frozen in place. "Telling you, Dennis, it's a waste of time," the first voice said. "The king's not paying for broken goods anymore. He wants females who can actually survive the first night. And how's he supposed to know if they can survive if we don't bring them?" This was Dennis, apparently his tone sharp with irritation. "Besides," Clifton said, "the bounty's tripled. 3,000 silver for any female willing to attempt the trial." Rosalie's breath caught. 3,000 silver. That was more money than most wolves saw in a lifetime. "Willing," the first voice scoffed. "Like anyone goes to the Crimson Throne. Willingly. We'd have to capture one, and you know what happened to the last group that tried forcing a female on the king? He ripped them apart before they could even present her. So we find one desperate enough to choose it herself." There was a long pause, and Rosalie could almost feel the weight of consideration in it. Then, where are we supposed to find someone that desperate, Dennis? Any female with half a brain would rather go rogue than face Angelo Chase. Rosalie stood up before she could talk herself out of it. She stepped around the rocky overhang, making enough noise that both males whirled to face her, hands going to weapons. They were older than she'd expected, one lean and weathered with gray shot through his dark hair, the other stockier with the kind of scars that spoke of a violent life. Both wore the neutral browns of wanderers, wolves who belonged to no pack. "I'll go," Rosalie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "To the Crimson Throne. I'll attempt the trial." The gray-haired one, Dennis, she assumed, stared at her like she'd grown a second head. What now? I heard you talking about the bounty." Rosalie lifted her chin, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. 3,000 silver for any female willing to face the king. "I'm willing." The stockier male laughed. A sound like rocks grinding together. "You're mad. Or suicidal. Possibly both. Does it matter?" Rosalie countered. "You get your bounty either way." Dennis stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he took her measure. She could see him cataloging details: her torn dress, the rejection wound she couldn't quite hide, the desperate edge that clung to her like smoke. "You're recently rejected," he said slowly. "I can smell it on you. What happened? Pack toss you out? That's none of your concern." "It is if you're trying to use the king as an elaborate form of suicide," Dennis said, but his tone had shifted from mocking to something almost cautious, respectful even. "Why do you really want to go to the Crimson Throne?" Rosalie considered lying. Considered telling them about the bounty, about needing money, about any of the practical reasons that might make sense. But something in Dennis's eyes, a kind of weary wisdom that spoke of too many hard choices, made her tell a version of the truth instead. "My mother left me a message," she said quietly. "She said when the time came, I should go north. That there was something I needed to do there. Someone I needed to." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, sing him back. It sounded insane even in her own head. "Your mother," Dennis repeated. "She a seer?" Rosalie blinked. I don't know. Maybe. She knew things sometimes, dreamed things that came true." Dennis and his companion exchanged a long look, some wordless conversation passing between them. Finally, Dennis sighed and rubbed his face. "All right. Against my better judgment, we'll take you. But I'm going to warn you once, and only once. The king isn't some misunderstood prince waiting for true love's kiss. He's dangerous. He's killed females stronger and smarter than you. If you're going there expecting to save him or change him or whatever romantic nonsense your mother's message implied, you're going to die." "I know," Rosalie said, and meant it. "And you're still willing?" She thought about her mother's voice, changing in those final moments. About 12 years of feeling purposeless, broken, wrong. About 3 rejections and a barren womb and a future that held nothing but running until she couldn't run anymore. "Yes," Rosalie said, "I'm still willing." Dennis studied her for another long moment, then nodded. "All right then. I'm Dennis Pope, and this charming bastard is Daryl Fitzpatrick. We're bounty hunters, but we're not monsters. We'll get you to the Crimson Throne safely, and we'll make sure you're actually given a choice when we get there. After that," he shrugged, "after that, you're on your own. That's all I'm asking." They traveled for 2.5 days, moving steadily north through territories that grew progressively emptier. Dennis and Daryl were good guides, better than good actually. They knew which paths to take to avoid rogue packs, which streams were safe to drink from, which caves provided the best shelter. They shared their supplies without complaint, and they didn't ask invasive questions about her past. But they did talk about the king. "First time I saw Angelo Chase was about 8 years ago," Dennis said on the second night, as they sat around a small fire. Before the curse, he'd just been crowned youngest Alphaking in 3 centuries, and there was this energy around him, like standing next to a lightning storm. You could feel the power rolling off him in waves. "He was supposed to unite the packs," Daryl added, poking at the fire with a stick. "The prophets had been talking about him since he was born, said he carried the bloodline of the first kings, that he'd restore the old ways and bring peace to the territories." "What happened?" Rosalie asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Dennis's face darkened. "Love happened. Or what he thought was love. There was a female, Edna Soto, from the southern packs. Beautiful, clever, ambitious. She and Angelo were matched by the council, and for a while, It seemed like the prophecy was coming true. She was supposed to be his queen, his partner in reuniting the packs. But she betrayed him, Daryl said flatly. Turns out she was working with a faction that wanted the throne for themselves. She poisoned Angelo on their bonding night, not enough to kill him, but enough to weaken him while her allies attacked. Rosalie felt something cold settle in her stomach. What did he do? Killed them all, Dennis said quietly. Every single one. But the poison Edna used wasn't just poison. It was curse work, old magic that most wolves don't even believe in anymore. It twisted something in him, broke the bond between his human mind and his wolf. Now, during the full moon, he becomes something else, something that's neither man nor wolf nor anything natural. And Edna? Rosalie asked. Dead, Daryl said. He killed her last, and some say that's what sealed the curse. Killed his own mate, even if she deserved it. And the moon goddess turned her face away from him in punishment. Rosalie absorbed this, trying to reconcile the story with her mother's journal. Go to the king who has forgotten himself. Was that what the curse did? Made him forget his humanity? The females they've sent, she said carefully. The ones who died, what happened to them? Dennis and Daryl exchanged another one of their looks. Most of them were offerings from packs trying to gain favor, Dennis said finally. Daughters sacrificed for political advantage. They were terrified before they even arrived, and fear. He shook his head. Fear triggers his predator instincts. He can't help himself. But there was one, Daryl said slowly. About 3 years ago, a female named Charmaine, from one of the eastern packs. She wasn't afraid. Walked right up to him during a full moon, like she was meeting him for tea. They say he actually spoke to her. That for a moment he seemed almost himself again. Rosalie leaned forward. What happened? She tried to use magic to bind him, Dennis said, his voice heavy with something like regret. Some kind of spell she'd learned from a witch. The moment he felt it taking hold, felt himself being controlled. He tore her apart. They found pieces of her scattered across half the throne room. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Rosalie felt her mother's journal pressing against her side where she'd tucked it into her belt. A binding song. That's what her mother had called it. But after what happened to Charmaine, would Angelo even allow himself to be bound again? Or would he kill Rosalie the moment she started singing? Why do you keep trying? She asked quietly. You and all the other bounty hunters. If it's so dangerous, if so many females have died, why keep bringing them? Because the bounty keeps going up, Daryl said bluntly. And because somewhere deep down, I think most of us hope it'll work. Hope someone will break the curse and bring back the king who was supposed to save us all. Hope's a dangerous thing, Dennis muttered. So is giving up. They lapsed into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Rosalie lay down on her bedroll, staring up at the stars through the canopy of trees, and let herself hum very, very softly. Just a few notes of her mother's lullaby, barely more than a breath. The wind shifted, carrying her melody away into the darkness. And somewhere far to the north, in a throne room painted crimson with the blood of failures, something ancient stirred and turned its face toward the sound. The crimson throne appeared on the afternoon of the third day, rising from the mountainside like a scar carved into the stone. It was both smaller and larger than Rosalie had imagined, smaller in the sense that it wasn't the sprawling palace she'd pictured, but larger in the sheer presence it commanded. The red stone seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and even from a distance, Rosalie could feel something emanating from it. Power. Ancient and angry, and barely contained. Last chance to turn back, Dennis said as they approached the base of the mountain path. Once we take you up there and announce your intention, there's no changing your mind. The king's law is clear. Any female who attempts the trial must see it through to the end. What exactly is the trial? Rosalie asked. She'd been too afraid to ask before, but now, with the throne looming above her, she needed to know. You survive 3 nights, Daryl said. 3 full moons with the king in whatever form the curse takes. If you're still alive at the end of the 3rd night, you're declared his bondmate and queen of the territories. And if I'm not alive? Then you join the 17 who came before you. Rosalie took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her mother's journal against her hip, hearing the echo of that transformed lullaby in her memory. Sing him back, she'd come this far. She couldn't turn away now, even if every survival instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run. "I'm ready," she said. They climbed the mountain path in silence. The air grew colder as they ascended, and Rosalie realized with a start that there were no birds, no insects, no signs of life at all. Even the plants looked stunted and wrong, as if something had poisoned the very earth. The throne's main gate stood open. Though whether in welcome or warning, Rosalie couldn't tell. 2 guards flanked the entrance, both male, both looking exhausted in a way that spoke of too many sleepless nights. They straightened as Dennis approached, and Rosalie saw relief flash across their faces. "Bounty hunters," one of them said. "You're late. Full moon's tomorrow night." "We're aware," Dennis replied. "This is Rosalie Ramirez. She's volunteering for the trial." Both guards' eyes snapped to Rosalie, and she saw the same mixture of pity and curiosity she'd grown used to. But there was something else there too. Something that looked almost like hope? Volunteering? The second guard repeated. "Not sent by her pack?" "No pack," Rosalie said, lifting her chin. "I came of my own free will." The guards exchanged glances. "The king needs to approve any trial participants," the first one said. "But he's not seeing visitors right now. Hasn't been for 3 days. The full moon's close, and he's already starting to change." "Make an exception," Dennis said flatly. "She came a long way for this. We can't just—" "Then I'll announce myself," Rosalie interrupted. She was suddenly tired of being discussed like she wasn't there, tired of people making decisions for her, tired of being treated like something broken and helpless. "Where is he?" "The throne room. But you can't." Rosalie walked past them, through the open gate, and into the fortress beyond. Behind her, she heard Dennis swear and Daryl laugh, but she didn't stop. Her mother's lullaby was humming in her blood now, a living thing that seemed to pull her forward, guiding her steps through corridors she'd never seen before but somehow knew. Left at the first intersection, right at the second, up the spiral staircase that seemed to climb forever, through the great hall with its vaulted ceilings and empty tables, past tapestries that depicted wolves united under a single banner, a dream that had died with the current king's curse. And then she was standing before 2 massive doors carved from dark wood, reinforced with iron, and she knew without being told that the throne room lay beyond them. Rosalie placed her hand against the cold wood and pushed. The doors swung open with surprising ease, revealing a space that stole the breath from her lungs. The throne room was circular, carved from the same red stone as the rest of the fortress, with a domed ceiling that rose at least 50 feet above her head. Narrow windows circled the upper walls, letting in shafts of late afternoon light that caught the dust motes and made them glow like tiny stars. And in the center, on a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, sat Angelo Chase. He was both exactly what she'd expected and nothing like it at all. Tall, even sitting, she could tell he would tower over her. Broad-shouldered, with the kind of muscled build that came from combat rather than ceremony. His hair was longer than current fashion dictated, falling past his shoulders in dark waves that looked like they hadn't been properly cared for in months. He wore simple clothes, a loose shirt and leather pants rather than royal regalia, and his feet were bare against the stone floor. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. They were wrong. Not in color, they were dark, almost black, but in the way they looked at her. Or rather, through her, like he was seeing something beyond the physical, something that existed in a space between human and animal, real and nightmare. "You shouldn't be here," he said, and his voice was like gravel dragged across metal, deep and rough and edged with something that might have been pain or might have been rage. "The guards should have turned you away." "They tried," Rosalie said, surprised her voice didn't shake. "I didn't listen." Something flickered in those wrong eyes. Interest, maybe. Or annoyance. Another sacrifice from another pack trying to curry favor. "How original. Tell me which pack leader promised you to me. What did your family get in exchange for your life?" "Nothing," Rosalie said. "No one sent me. I came because I chose to." Now she had his full attention. Angelo leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the arms of his throne with enough force that she heard the stone crack. "Chose to," he repeated slowly. "You chose to come here, to face a monster, to attempt a trial that 17 females have already failed. Tell me, volunteer, Are you brave or merely stupid? Neither, Rosalie said. I'm desperate. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh. Desperate. Yes, I suppose that makes sense. Let me guess, rejected by your pack? Barren, perhaps? Cast out with nowhere else to go, so you thought you'd try your luck with the cursed king. At least if you die here, you'll die with purpose, instead of wandering the wilderness like a rogue. Every word hit like a physical blow, but Rosalie refused to flinch. You're partially right, she said quietly. I was rejected. I am barren. But I didn't come here to die. I came here because my mother told me to. That got a reaction. Angelo's eyes narrowed, and for just a moment, she saw something human flicker across his face. Your mother. She left me a journal. With a message. She said. Rosalie swallowed hard, gathering her courage. She said when the third moon rejected me, I should come north, to the crimson throne, to the king who had forgotten himself. She paused, then added softly, she said I should sing you back. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Angelo rose from his throne in one fluid movement, and Rosalie finally understood the true scale of him. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, maybe more, and the power rolling off him was suffocating. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, and suddenly he was looming over her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Sing, he said. And the word was barely more than a growl. What does that mean? Sing what? Rosalie's hand moved to her belt, pulling out her mother's journal with shaking fingers. A lullaby. A binding song that's been in my family for generations. My mother said it was meant for you. That we're connected somehow. Angelo stared at the journal like it was a weapon. A binding song, he repeated, and now there was definitely rage in his voice. You came here to bind me, to control me, just like he cut himself off, but Rosalie knew what he'd been about to say. Just like Edna. No, Rosalie said urgently. Not to control you. The song isn't like that. It's meant to complete something. My mother wrote that it needs 2 voices. One to sing it, one to answer. It's not about control. It's about connection, Angelo finished, and the rage had drained from his voice, replaced by something that sounded almost like grief. 2 souls bound across time. He reached out, and for a moment Rosalie thought he was going to take the journal. Instead, his fingers brushed against her jaw, tilting her face up so she was forced to meet those 2 dark eyes. What's your name, desperate volunteer? Rosalie, she whispered. Rosalie Ramirez. Rosalie, he repeated, tasting the name. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back, putting distance between them. The full moon rises tomorrow night. Rosalie Ramirez. If you're still here when it does, I won't be able to stop myself from trying to kill you. The curse doesn't allow for compassion or restraint. It only knows hunger and rage and the need to destroy. I know, Rosalie said. And you still want to attempt the trial? To stay here? To face whatever I become? Rosalie thought about her mother's transformed lullaby, about 12 years of feeling purposeless, about the way Angelo's fingers had felt against her skin gentle, despite the monster he claimed to be. She thought about the matching emptiness she'd seen in his eyes, the same hollowness that had been eating at her since the first rejection. Yes, she said. I still want to stay. Angelo studied her for a long moment, and Rosalie could have sworn she saw something like regret flicker across his face. Then he turned and walked back to his throne, settling into it like a condemned man accepting his sentence. Marcos, he called out, and one of the guards appeared in the doorway. Take Rosalie to the southern chambers. Give her whatever she needs. Food, clothes, supplies. He paused, then added quietly. Make sure she's comfortable for the time she has left. Yes, Your Majesty. As Marcos led Rosalie toward the door, she looked back over her shoulder. Angelo sat on his throne, staring at nothing, and in the fading light he looked less like a king and more like a man waiting for an execution. Her execution, specifically. Rosalie's hand found her mother's journal again, and she clutched it tight as they walked through the corridors. Tomorrow night, the full moon would rise. Tomorrow night, she would face whatever Angelo became, and tomorrow night, she would sing. Whether it saved them both or killed her trying remained to be seen. Chapter 3. The First Night. Survival Through Song. The southern chambers were far more luxurious than anything Rosalie had ever experienced. High ceilings with intricate molding, a 4-poster bed draped in silk that looked like it cost more than her entire former life, windows that overlooked the valley below, where the sunset painted everything in shades of gold and crimson. There was a bathing room attached, complete with a massive copper tub and soaps that smelled of lavender and honey. It felt like a gilded cage designed for a beautiful corpse. Marcos had been kind, in his way. He'd brought her fresh clothes, a simple dress in deep green that actually fit, along with a warm robe for the evening chill. He'd arranged for food to be sent up, though Rosalie's stomach was too twisted with anxiety to eat much, and he'd explained, in careful detail, what would happen when the full moon rose. "The king will be confined to the throne room," Marcos had said, not quite meeting her eyes. "It's the only space large enough and reinforced enough to contain him. You'll be brought there at moonrise. The doors will be sealed from the outside for your protection as much as his. If..." He'd paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you survive until moonset, the guards will open the doors and escort you back here. That's the first night. You'll have the full day to recover before the second moon." "And if I don't survive?" Rosalie had asked. Marcos had finally looked at her then, and the sorrow in his eyes was genuine. "Then we'll make sure you have a proper burial. Your name will be added to the memorial with the others, and we'll all pray to the moon goddess that the next female is the one who breaks the curse." He'd left after that, and Rosalie had been alone with her thoughts and her mother's journal. She'd spent the afternoon reading every entry, tracing her mother's handwriting with shaking fingers, trying to understand. The song of binding appeared throughout the journal in fragments, a verse here, a notation there, pieces of a puzzle that her mother had been slowly assembling over years. But it was the final entry, dated the day before her mother's death, that made Rosalie's breath catch. "Tonight, I will die. I've seen it in the smoke, in the patterns of the tea leaves, in the way the crows gather at the window. Wolfsbane meant for another, but my time is done regardless. I've served my purpose, I've carried the song this far, and now it's Rosalie's turn. My daughter, if you're reading this, know that your barrenness was never a flaw. It was a gift. The song cannot be sung by someone whose power is divided between the living and the yet-to-be-born. It requires all of you, your full strength, your complete focus, your undivided soul. The king you're meant to save doesn't know he's waiting for you. He's buried himself so deep in rage and grief that he's forgotten what it means to be whole. But his wolf remembers, his blood remembers, and when you sing, those buried parts will recognize the call. 3 nights you must survive, 3 moons you must face the beast. But remember, the beast is not your enemy. Fear is. The curse feeds on terror, grows stronger with every scream, every whimper, every sign of weakness. But music? Music is fear's opposite. Music is courage given voice. Sing, my daughter. Sing like your life depends on it. Because it does. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, Rosalie stood at the window and hummed the opening bars of her mother's lullaby. The melody felt different here, in this place of power and pain. It resonated somehow, making the air vibrate with something that was almost but not quite magic. A knock at the door interrupted her humming. Marcos entered, his face grave, and Rosalie knew without asking that it was time. "The moon's rising," he said quietly. "The king has requested..." He stopped, correcting himself. "The king has asked if you would consent to being escorted to the throne room now, before the transformation completes. He wants to explain something." Rosalie nodded, her throat too tight for words. She grabbed her mother's journal, tucking it into the pocket of her robe, and followed Marcos through the corridors. The fortress felt different at night, darker, heavier, as if the stones themselves remembered every death that had occurred within these walls. They reached the throne room doors, and Rosalie could hear something from within. Not words, but sounds, low growls punctuated by what might have been gasps or sobs. Pain. Sounds. The transformation, she realized, was already beginning. Marcos placed his hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but not unkind. "Last chance to change your mind. We can say you fell ill, that it wasn't safe. Open the doors, Rosalie said. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded and pulled the heavy doors open. Moon goddess protect you, he whispered as she stepped inside. The throne room had changed since the afternoon. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, casting dancing shadows across the red stone. The windows were now barred with what looked like silver, deadly to werewolves, a barrier that would hold even the strongest wolf. And in the center of the room, on his knees in front of the black throne, was Angelo. He was shirtless now, and Rosalie could see the transformation rippling across his skin like something alive. His muscles spasmed and shifted, bones cracking and reforming beneath the flesh. Dark fur sprouted along his spine and shoulders, then receded, then appeared again. His face was still mostly human, but his eyes, those two dark eyes, were already beginning to shift, the pupils elongating into something predatory. You came, he said, his voice rougher than before, edged with a growl that hadn't been there this afternoon. I wasn't sure you would. You asked me to, Rosalie replied, staying near the door. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to remain still. Angelo laughed, a bitter sound that scraped against her nerves. I didn't think you'd actually listen. He managed to push himself to his feet, swaying slightly, bracing one hand against the throne for support. I wanted to warn you, before it's too late. Before I become something that can't remember why killing you would be wrong. Warn me about what? The hunger, Angelo said, and now his voice was definitely more growl than human speech. When the transformation completes, I'll want to hurt you, to tear you apart. Not because of who you are, but because of what you are prey. Female, vulnerable. Everything the beast inside me is designed to hunt. His hand clenched on the throne. And Rosalie heard stone crack. I've tried to fight it. For 3 years, 18 moons, I've tried to maintain control. It never works. My mother said the curse feeds on fear, Rosalie said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded, that it grows stronger when its victims are terrified. Your mother was right. Angelo's spine arched, another wave of transformation rippling through him. When he spoke again, his canines had elongated into fangs. Which is why you need to leave. Now. While I can still ask. While I still. He cut off with a roar of pain, dropping back to his knees. Outside the throne room, Rosalie heard the heavy doors closing with a finality that echoed through her bones. The sound of bolts sliding home. They were locked in now, for better or worse. Until moonset, or death. I'm not leaving, Rosalie said. You're a fool. Angelo managed, his voice barely recognizable now. A brave, desperate fool, who's going to die because of a lullaby and a journal entry. Maybe, Rosalie agreed. She moved further into the room, circling wide to keep distance between them while she found a spot with her back to the wall. Or maybe my mother knew something you don't. And what's that? The question came out as more snarl than words. That some songs are stronger than curses. Angelo's response was lost in a howl of agony as the final stage of transformation took hold. His body convulsed, bones reshaping with sounds that made Rosalie's stomach turn. His face elongated into something between human and wolf, his hands becoming claws that could tear through stone. Dark fur spread across his entire body, and when he finally raised his head to look at her, there was nothing human left in those eyes. Only hunger. The beast that had been Angelo Chase rose to its full height, easily 7 feet tall now, all muscle and fur and deadly intent. It sniffed the air, scenting her, and Rosalie saw the exact moment it registered her as prey. Its lips pulled back from fangs that could snap her spine in half, and a rumble built in its chest that promised violence. Then it moved. Faster than anything that size should be able to move, it closed the distance between them in 2 massive bounds. Rosalie barely had time to throw herself sideways, hitting the ground hard and rolling. Claws scraped stone where she'd been standing, leaving gouges an inch deep. The beast whirled toward her with impossible speed, and Rosalie scrambled backward on instinct, her back hitting the wall. Cornered. She was cornered, and the thing wearing Angelo's face was stalking toward her with the patience of a predator that knew its prey had nowhere left to run. This was it, the moment where all the other females had screamed, had begged, had broken down in terror that fed the curse and made the beast unstoppable. Rosalie could feel the scream building in her own throat, could feel panic threatening to overwhelm her completely. But beneath the fear, she felt something else. Her mother's journal pressed against her side, her mother's voice echoing in her memory, her mother's final words, "Sing like your life depends on it." So Rosalie opened her mouth and sang. The lullaby came out shaky at first, her voice cracking with terror, but she pushed through it. The melody that had been passed down through generations of Ramirez women, the song her mother had sung every night until the night it changed. Rosalie sang the opening verse, the one about moonlight and safety and protection, and she watched the beast's reaction. It froze. Just completely froze. One massive paw raised to strike, its entire body going rigid with something that looked almost like shock. The red glow in its eyes flickered, and for just a moment so brief, Rosalie almost missed it. She saw a flash of human confusion. "That's right," Rosalie whispered between verses. "You know this song, don't you?" Somewhere deep down, beneath the curse and the rage, you remember. The beast's head tilted, an eerily human gesture. It lowered its raised paw slowly, still watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Rosalie continued singing, moving carefully into the second verse, the one about storms passing and dawn coming and hope surviving the darkest night. And the beast began to hum. It was a broken sound, grinding and rough like stones being dragged across each other, but it was definitely an attempt at harmony. The beast was trying to match her melody, its throat producing sounds that were part growl, part music, part something that transcended both. Rosalie's voice strengthened, growing more confident as she realized this was working. The curse was still there, she could see it in the beast's unnatural size, in the red glow that kept trying to reassert itself in its eyes, but the song was cutting through it somehow, creating a space where Angelo could exist even in this monstrous form. She sang through the third verse, then the fourth, cycling back to the beginning when she ran out of verses she'd memorized. The beast settled onto its haunches, still watching her but no longer radiating that aura of immediate threat. Its head drooped slightly, and Rosalie realized with a start that it looked tired, exhausted, even, like the simple act of maintaining this much control was costing it dearly. "Where did you learn that?" The words were barely understandable, twisted by the beast's fanged mouth, but they were definitely words. Angelo, some part of Angelo was still in there. "My mother taught me," Rosalie said softly, afraid that speaking instead of singing would break whatever spell they'd created. "She sang it to me every night. She said it was important, that I needed to remember every note, every word. I didn't understand why until now," the beast finished. It closed its eyes, and when it spoke again, its voice was marginally clearer. "My mother sang it too. Different words, I think. Different language. But the melody was the same." Rosalie's heart stuttered. "Your mother knew this song?" "The Chase bloodline is old," Angelo said through the beast's mouth, each word clearly an effort. "Older than the packs, older than the territories. We keep records, histories that go back to the first wolves. And in those records there are songs, binding songs, protection songs, songs meant to be sung." When he stopped, his eyes flying open as another wave of the curse rolled through him. The red glow intensified, and Rosalie saw his control slipping. She started singing again immediately, louder this time, putting all her focus into the melody. The beast shuddered, fighting against the curse's pull, and gradually the red glow faded back to a simmer rather than a flame. "Thank you," Angelo whispered when he could speak again. "I haven't been able to think clearly during a transformation in 3 years. Haven't been able to remember my name, let alone have a conversation. But your song, it's like an anchor, something to hold on to when everything else is rage and hunger." "How long will it last?" Rosalie asked, still humming between words to maintain the connection. "I don't know. Until moonset. Maybe, if you can keep singing. Or until the curse finds a way to adapt to the frequency. It's clever, the curse. It learns." The beast's massive shoulders slumped. Edna made sure of that when she crafted it. A curse that couldn't be predicted, couldn't be anticipated, couldn't be easily broken. Rosalie wanted to ask more about Edna, about the betrayal, about what had happened that night. But the beast's eyes were starting to lose focus, the red creeping back in, around the edges. She needed to keep singing, needed to maintain the anchor he'd mentioned. So she sang. She sang through the night, her voice growing hoarse, and then finding some reserve of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She sang all the verses she knew, then made up new ones, weaving in words about survival and strength and two souls finding each other across impossible distances. The beast listened, sometimes humming along, sometimes just watching her with those not quite Angelo eyes. Twice, the curse surged stronger, and the beast lunged toward her with murderous intent. Both times, Rosalie stood her ground and sang louder, stronger, forcing the melody between them like a shield. Both times, Angelo fought his way back to awareness, his voice joining hers in that rough harmony, until the curse retreated again. As the hours crept past, an understanding began to develop between them, a rhythm. She would sing, he would anchor himself to the melody. When she grew tired, he would hum the tune himself, giving her voice a rest. When the curse grew strong, they would sing together, their combined voices creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. And slowly, incredibly, Rosalie realized she was no longer afraid. Oh, she was still aware of the danger. The beast's claws could disembowel her with a casual swipe, its fangs could crush her skull like an eggshell. But the terror that had gripped her at the start of the night had transformed into something else. Into focus, into determination, into a strange, fierce protectiveness for the broken king, fighting so hard to stay himself despite the monster his body had become. "Why did you really come here?" Angelo asked during one of his more lucid moments, when the moon was past its zenith and beginning its descent toward the horizon. "You could have run anywhere, could have started over in unclaimed territory. Why risk this?" Rosalie considered the question while she hummed through another verse. Finally she said, "Because I was tired of running, tired of being rejected and discarded and told I was broken. When I read my mother's journal, when I saw that she'd believed I had a purpose, that there was something I was meant to do." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "I guess I wanted to believe it too. Even if it meant dying here. At least I would have died trying to be something more than just the barren female everyone pitied." The beast made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "We're a fine pair, aren't we? The cursed king and the rejected wolf. Both broken in ways that matter to everyone else. Both desperate enough to try something insane." "Is it working though?" Rosalie asked. "Does the song help?" "More than you know," Angelo said quietly. "I can't remember the last time I felt human during a full moon. Can't remember the last time I had a coherent thought, instead of just rage and hunger, and the need to destroy. You're giving me pieces of myself back, even if it's only for these hours." "Then I'll keep singing," Rosalie said simply. They continued through the night, the song building a bridge between human and beast, between curse and cure, between two souls who'd been told they were worthless and were determined to prove otherwise. And when the first rays of dawn finally touched the horizon, when the moon began to set and the transformation reversed, Rosalie sang the final verse, the one her mother had written in the journal but never sung aloud. The one about two voices becoming one song, two souls becoming one strength, two broken pieces finding their way to whole. Angelo collapsed as his human form reasserted itself, gasping and shaking on the cold stone floor. Rosalie's voice finally gave out, the last notes trailing into silence, and she realized she was crying. From exhaustion, from relief, from the sheer emotional weight of what they'd just survived. The doors burst open, and Marcos rushed in with two other guards. They stopped short, staring in obvious shock at the scene before them. Angelo was alive. Rosalie was alive. And neither of them bore any serious injuries. "Impossible," one of the guards breathed. "Not impossible," Marcos said slowly, a smile beginning to spread across his face. "Just unprecedented." He looked at Rosalie with something like awe. "You survived the first night." Angelo pushed himself up on shaking arms, his human eyes finding Rosalie's across the throne room. "She did more than survive," he said, his voice raw but unmistakably human. "She gave me back my mind." "For one night," Rosalie said, her own voice barely more than a croak. "We still have 2 more moons, 2 more nights where the curse will try to adapt, try to find a way around the song. Then we'll adapt too," Angelo said. He stood slowly, accepting a robe that one of the guards offered, and crossed to where Rosalie still sat with her back against the wall. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, and when he pulled her to her feet, she swayed with exhaustion. "Easy," he said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Marcos, escort Rosalie back to her chambers. Make sure she has everything she needs. Food, water, healing drafts if necessary. And," he paused, his jaw tightening, "and thank her. Thank her for me, until I can find words adequate to do it myself." "You just did," Rosalie said quietly. Their eyes met and held, and something passed between them. An acknowledgement. A promise. They'd survived the first night, but this was just the beginning. 2 more moons to endure. 2 more chances for the curse to kill her, or drive him so far into the beast that he couldn't find his way back. But they'd also proven something tonight, that her mother's song was real, that the connection between them existed. That maybe, just maybe, they could actually break a curse that had defeated 17 females before her. As Marcos led Rosalie toward the door, she looked back one more time. Angelo stood in the center of his throne room, surrounded by the gouges and scars from 3 years of transformations, and for the first time since she'd met him, he didn't look defeated. He looked like he was beginning to hope. And that, Rosalie thought as exhaustion finally began to drag her under, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 4. The secret his dead mother left for her. Rosalie woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, and the smell of food that made her stomach growl with sudden, desperate hunger. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the room too large, everything too luxurious to be real. Then the memories crashed back. The throne room, the beast, the song that had saved her life. Her throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass. She pushed herself upright, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles, and found a tray on the bedside table. Bread still warm from the oven, honey, fresh fruit, cheese, and a pot of tea that smelled of herbs she didn't recognize. There was also a small folded note written in strong, angular handwriting. "For your throat. Drink all of it. You'll need your voice tonight. A." Rosalie poured the tea, inhaling the steam. It smelled medicinal. Not unpleasant. Exactly. But purposeful. She sipped carefully and felt immediate relief, as the liquid coated her raw throat with something cool and soothing. By the time she'd finished the pot, she could swallow without pain. She ate mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to the second night. The curse would adapt, Angelo had said. It would learn from last night, find ways to counter the song's effect, which meant she couldn't just repeat what she'd done. She needed to understand more about the curse, about the song, about the connection her mother had written about. The song is incomplete without both voices, the shield and the sword, the bearer and the keeper. What did that mean? Last night, Angelo had mentioned that his mother knew the song too, that the Chase bloodline kept records of binding songs. Were they meant to sing it together? Was that the key to breaking the curse entirely? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Rosalie called, her voice still rough but functional. Marcos entered, carrying an armful of fabric. "His Majesty requests your presence in the library," he said, depositing what turned out to be clothes on her bed, a simple tunic and pants in soft brown leather, along with sturdy boots. "He thought you might be more comfortable in something practical. And he said to tell you." Marcos paused, a small smile tugging at his lips. "He said to tell you that answers require reading, and reading requires proper attire." Rosalie couldn't help but smile back. He actually said that? His exact words were more colorful, but yes, that was the general meaning. Marcos moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Lady Rosalie, what you did last night, no one's ever survived the first night like that. No one's ever calmed him during a transformation. The whole fortress is talking about it. There are guards who've served here for 3 years who've never heard the king speak a coherent sentence during a full moon." "It was the song," Rosalie said quietly. "Not me." "Maybe," Marcos said, "but you're the one who had the courage to sing it." He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that made Rosalie's chest tighten and left her alone to dress. The leather clothes fit perfectly, though Rosalie had no idea how Angelo had known her measurements. Then again, He'd been a beast with enhanced senses last night. He'd probably catalogued everything about her: her size, her scent, her heart rate, the exact timbre of her voice. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead it felt oddly intimate. She braided her copper hair back from her face, tucked her mother's journal into the tunic's inner pocket, and followed the route Marcos had indicated. The library turned out to be in the eastern wing, up 2 flights of stairs and through a corridor lined with portraits of former kings. Rosalie paused at one, a man with Angelo's bone structure and dark eyes, but with a warmth in his expression that the current king lacked. "My father," a voice said behind her, and Rosalie turned to find Angelo leaning against the doorframe of the library. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his hair still damp from what must have been a recent bath, but there was an alertness in his gaze that hadn't been there yesterday. Clifton Chase. He ruled for 43 years before the sickness took him. He was a good king, better than I'll ever be. "You don't know that," Rosalie said. "Don't I?" Angelo's smile was bitter. He united 3 territories and brokered peace treaties that lasted decades. "I've been king for 8 years, cursed for 3 of them, and in that time I've watched the territories fracture further, watched the packs turn on each other, watched everything he built crumble, because I was fool enough to trust the wrong female." Rosalie studied him, this man who'd been a beast mere hours ago. In daylight, wearing simple clothes and an expression of bone-deep weariness, he looked less like a monster, and more like someone who'd been carrying an impossible weight for too long. "Show me the library," she said instead of responding to his self-recrimination. "You said something about answers." Angelo's expression shifted, some of the bitterness fading. "This way." The library was breathtaking. 3 stories of books reaching toward a domed glass ceiling, with spiral staircases connecting the levels and alcoves carved into the walls for private reading. The morning sun poured through the glass, making the dust motes dance like tiny stars. Rosalie had never seen so many books in her life. "The Chase Archive," Angelo said, watching her reaction with something that might have been pride. "Over 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge, history, philosophy, magic theory, bloodline records. If the answer to breaking my curse exists anywhere, it's in here." "Have you looked?" Rosalie asked. "For 3 years," Angelo said flatly. "I've read every text on curse breaking, every account of binding magic, every historical precedent I could find. Nothing worked. The curse is too specific, too personal. It was designed for me, keyed to my particular weaknesses." He moved toward one of the alcoves, where several books were already laid out on a reading table. "But last night changed things. Your song did something none of my research predicted, so I thought we should look at it from a different angle." "What angle?" Angelo picked up one of the books, ancient by the look of it, the leather cover cracked with age. "Your mother said the song needed 2 voices. The bearer and the keeper. When I was researching my family's history this morning, I found references to those terms. They appear in texts about soul bonds, not the kind created by pack tradition, but older bonds. Primordial bonds that existed before wolves had packs or territories." Rosalie felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of bonds?" "The texts call them resonance bonds," Angelo said, opening the book to a page marked with a strip of cloth. "They're rare, maybe 1 pair born every few generations. 2 souls that vibrate at the same frequency, literally and metaphorically. When they find each other, they create a harmonic that amplifies both of their strengths." He looked up at her, his dark eyes intense. "The bearer carries the potential. The keeper holds the key. Together they can accomplish things that neither could alone. And you think we're—" Rosalie couldn't finish the sentence. "I think your mother believed it," Angelo said carefully. "And I think last night might have proven her right. When you sang and I harmonized, I felt something I'd never felt during a transformation. Like there were 2 of me, the beast and the man, and your voice was the thread connecting them, keeping them tethered together, instead of letting the beast consume the man entirely." Rosalie moved to the table, looking down at the ancient text. The language was old, older than any she'd learned, but there were illustrations. 2 figures facing each other, their hands raised, lines of light flowing between them in complex patterns. "How do we know if we're actually resonance bonded?" "There are tests," Angelo said. "According to this, resonance bonds manifest in specific ways. Shared dreams, for one. The ability to sense each other's emotions across distance. And he paused, his jaw tightening slightly. A physical reaction to proximity. When two bonded souls are near each other, there's a pull, an attraction that goes beyond physical desire or emotional connection. Rosalie thought about the moment in the throne room yesterday, when Angelo had touched her jaw, how her skin had felt electrified where his fingers rested, how even now, standing near him in the library, she could feel something humming beneath her skin, a warmth, an awareness, a magnetic pull that made her want to move closer. "I feel it," she admitted quietly. "Do you?" Angelo's eyes darkened. "Since the moment you walked into my throne room, I thought it was just the curse recognizing prey. But it's different from what I felt with the others. With them it was hunger, with you it's—" He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "It's like recognizing something I'd lost, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." The air between them felt charged, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Rosalie forced herself to step back, to focus on the practical. "If we are resonance bonded, does that mean the song can break the curse?" "Maybe," Angelo said, though he didn't sound convinced. "The texts suggest that resonance bonds can overcome curse work because they operate on a different frequency. The curse is designed to isolate me, to cut me off from my humanity and trap me in the beast. But if your voice can anchor me, can maintain that connection between my two halves." He shook his head. "I don't know. The theory is promising, but theory and practice are very different things." "Then we practice," Rosalie said firmly. "We have all day before the second moon. Teach me about your family's version of the song. Let me see if there are verses I don't know, harmonies we haven't tried." Angelo studied her for a long moment, and Rosalie saw something shift in his expression. The wariness didn't disappear entirely, but it softened, making room for something that looked almost like trust. "All right," he said. "But first, you need to understand where the curse came from, what Edna did to me, and why the song might be the only thing that can undo it." He gestured to a chair, and Rosalie sat, watching as he began to pace. It seemed to help him think, moving through the shafts of sunlight that fell through the glass dome above. "Edna Soto came from the southern Pax," Angelo began, his voice carefully controlled. "She was beautiful, intelligent, politically savvy, everything a king's mate should be. The council approved our match. The prophets said it was destiny. For the first time since my father's death, I thought maybe I could actually do this. Actually be the king the territories needed." He stopped at one of the windows, staring out at the valley below. The bonding ceremony was elaborate. 3 days of ritual, with representatives from every major pack in attendance. On the final night, Edna and I were supposed to complete the bond exchange blood, speak the ancient vows, become one soul in 2 bodies. His hands clenched on the windowsill, but when she offered me her blood to drink, it was already poisoned. Curse work mixed with wolfsbane and something else. Something dark. "What did it do?" Rosalie asked softly. "Severed the connection between my human consciousness and my wolf," Angelo said. "Wolves are supposed to be integrated beings, human and animal existing in balance. The curse split me apart. During the full moon, when the transformation happens, my human mind gets locked away, and the wolf becomes something else entirely. Not a true wolf, which would still have intelligence and restraint, but a beast, pure instinct, pure rage, pure hunger. And Edna did this to you. Intentionally. She was working with a faction that wanted to destabilize the territories," Angelo confirmed. "They believed that if the Alphaking was revealed as a monster, the Pax would reject centralized authority entirely. They'd fracture, become easier to control and manipulate, and they almost succeeded. If I hadn't killed Edna and her co-conspirators that night, they would have spread the news far and wide. As it is, I managed to contain the information, but rumors still leaked. That's why so many Packs have been testing my borders, why the territories are more fractured than ever. They sense weakness." Rosalie processed this, understanding now why Angelo had reacted so violently to her mention of a binding song. "But I'm not trying to control you," she said. "The song isn't like Edna's curse. It's meant to connect, not sever." "I know," Angelo said, turning back to face her. "Or at least, the part of me that's still capable of trust knows. But the part that remembers Edna's betrayal, that remembers how she used intimacy and connection as weapons. He trailed off, his expression pained. It's hard to separate the two. Then don't, Rosalie said. Don't trust me blindly. Question everything. Test the song. Make sure it's doing what I say it's doing. I'm not asking for faith. I'm asking for collaboration. Something in Angelo's posture relaxed. Collaboration, he repeated. I can work with that. He moved back to the table, pulling out another book, this one newer, with the Chase family crest embossed on the cover. This is my mother's journal. She died when I was 12, but before she passed, she made my father promise to keep her writings safe, said they'd be important someday. He opened the journal, and Rosalie saw the same kind of musical notation her own mother had used, though the handwriting was different. More angular, more precise. She was documenting the same song. Rosalie breathed. Not exactly the same, Angelo said. Look at the verses. Different words, different emphasis, but the melody. He hummed a few bars, and Rosalie felt the hair on her arms stand up. It was her mother's lullaby, but harmonized differently. Where her mother's version was soft and comforting, this one was stronger, more assertive. The same foundation, but built toward different purposes. The shield and the sword, Rosalie whispered. Your mother's version is the sword, and yours is the shield, Angelo agreed. Separately, they're just songs. Beautiful, maybe, with some minor magical properties. But together, he looked at her, and Rosalie saw hope warring with fear in his eyes. Together, they might actually be able to break a curse designed by a master manipulator who knew exactly what she was doing. Rosalie pulled out her own mother's journal, laying it next to Angelo's mother's. The two books looked nothing alike, different sizes, different ages, one carefully maintained and one battered from years of use. But when Rosalie found the page with the song's notation and held it up next to the corresponding page in Angelo's journal, the similarities became impossible to ignore. They fit together, she said, tracing the lines with her finger. See? Where my mother's melody rises, yours falls. Where mine is sustained, yours has rhythm. It's like they were designed to interlock. Angelo leaned closer, studying the pages with intense focus. This close, Rosalie could smell him pine and smoke. And something wilder. Something that reminded her of the forest at night. That magnetic pull intensified, making her hyper-aware of his proximity, the warmth radiating from his body, the way his breathing had synchronized with hers without either of them noticing. Try singing them together, Angelo said, his voice rough. Just a few bars. Let's see what happens. Rosalie nodded, her own voice unsteady. She began with her mother's opening verse, the one about moonlight and safety. After 2 bars, Angelo joined in with his mother's version, the same melody, but harmonized a third above, creating a sound that was richer and more complex than either voice alone. The effect was immediate and startling. The air in the library seemed to vibrate with energy. Books rattled slightly on their shelves. The dust motes caught in the sunlight began to swirl in patterns that defied natural air currents. And between Rosalie and Angelo, something visible formed a faint shimmer, like heat waves rising from stone, but more solid, more real. They sang through the first verse, and the shimmer strengthened, taking on a golden color that pulsed in time with their combined voices. Rosalie could feel it in her chest, in her bones, in the very marrow of her being. This was power. Real, tangible, undeniable power. The kind that could break curses or remake worlds. They finished the verse, and the golden shimmer faded, but the feeling remained. Rosalie's hands were shaking, and when she looked at Angelo, she saw that his eyes had widened with something like awe. That's what we need, he said quietly. That's what can fight the curse. Not just your song or mine, but both together. That harmony. Then tonight, Rosalie said, we sing together from the start. No waiting for the transformation to complete. We begin the moment the moon rises and we don't stop until it sets. Angelo nodded slowly. It's going to be harder than last night. The curse will have adapted. It'll try to separate us, try to keep me from being able to harmonize with you. It might make me more violent, more aggressive, more determined to silence you permanently. Then we'll be more determined to sing, Rosalie said with more confidence than she felt. We proved last night that it's possible. Tonight we prove it can be repeated. And the third night. She paused, not wanting to voice the hope that was building in her chest. The third night. Maybe we break the curse entirely. Maybe. Angelo agreed. But Rosalie could see he was starting to believe it too. Starting to hope, despite 3 years of failure and 17 deaths and every reason to expect disappointment. They spent the rest of the day in the library, studying the journals, practicing the harmony, building their understanding of how the songs fit together. Angelo taught Rosalie verses from his mother's version that she'd never heard, and she showed him notations in her mother's journal that revealed hidden meanings in the lyrics. The more they sang together, the easier it became. Their voices learned each other's patterns, anticipating rises and falls, knowing instinctively when to push forward and when to pull back. It was like learning a new language, except this language was written in their bones, in their blood, in something deeper than conscious memory. As afternoon faded toward evening, Marcos appeared with food and news. "The moon will rise in 2 hours, Your Majesty. Should I begin preparations?" Angelo looked at Rosalie, and she saw the question in his eyes. "Are you ready? Are you sure you want to do this again?" She thought about her mother's final message. About 12 years of being told she was broken and worthless. About the way it felt when her voice and Angelo's voice combined into something greater than either could achieve alone. "We're ready," Rosalie said. The throne room felt different the second time. Maybe because Rosalie knew what to expect. Or maybe because Angelo stood beside her now instead of fighting the transformation alone. They'd entered together side by side, and he'd asked Marcos to wait until the last possible moment before sealing the doors. "I want you to know," Angelo said as they stood in the center of the room, watching the sun set through the barred windows. "If this goes wrong tonight, if the curse wins and I hurt you, I want you to know it won't be me, the real me, the part that's standing here now." "I know," Rosalie said. She reached out and took his hand, the first time she'd initiated physical contact, and felt that electric current run between them. "But it's not going to go wrong. We're stronger together than the curse expected. That's our advantage." Angelo's fingers tightened around hers. "Your mother raised a warrior. So did yours." The first rays of moonlight touched the floor, silver and cold, and Angelo gasped. The transformation was beginning. Earlier than last night. The curse adapting. Just as he'd predicted. His hand in hers began to change, bones cracking and reforming, claws extending where human nails had been. "Sing," Angelo managed through teeth that were elongating into fangs. "Now, before it takes me completely." Rosalie opened her mouth and let her mother's lullaby pour out, strong and clear despite the fear trying to choke her. This time, though, she didn't sing alone. Angelo's voice joined hers immediately, fighting through the transformation, maintaining the harmony even as his human throat became something else. The golden shimmer appeared between them again, stronger than in the library. It wrapped around Angelo like a protective barrier, and Rosalie saw the transformation slow. Not stop, the curse was too powerful for that, but slow. The beast that finally emerged was smaller than last night, less monstrous, more wolf than nightmare. And its eyes, while still not entirely human, held recognition, understanding. Angelo was still in there, still holding on, anchored by their combined song. "It's working," Rosalie breathed between verses. The beast nodded a clear, deliberate gesture and opened its fanged mouth to continue the harmony. The sound that emerged was still rough, still edged with growls, but it was music. Undeniable, beautiful, powerful music. They sang through the night together, their voices weaving patterns of sound that pushed back against the curse with every note. Sometimes the beast would move closer, drawn by the magnetic pull between them, and Rosalie would stand her ground, never breaking the melody. Sometimes the curse would surge stronger, and the beast's voice would falter, but Rosalie would sing louder until Angelo could find his way back to the harmony. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was the most intimate thing Rosalie had ever experienced. Because this wasn't just singing. This was sharing something fundamental. Her strength for his struggle, his determination for her courage. Every note they sang together wove them closer, creating bonds that went deeper than blood or pack or tradition. Resonance bonds, she thought, This was what it meant to resonate with another soul. Near dawn, when the moon was finally beginning to set and the transformation starting to reverse, something unexpected happened. The beast Angelo moved close enough to touch. Rosalie's song never faltered, but her heart hammered as those massive clawed hands reached toward her face with surprising gentleness. One claw traced the line of her jaw, feather-light despite its deadly potential. And then the beast did something none of the others had ever reported. It pressed its forehead against hers, still humming the harmony, and Rosalie felt something click into place in her chest. A bond, real and solid and unbreakable, not forced through ritual or pack tradition, but chosen, built note by note, harmony by harmony, through a night of singing against darkness. When the transformation finally completed and Angelo collapsed back into his human form, Rosalie collapsed with him. They ended up sitting on the cold stone floor, backs against each other for support, too exhausted to move but still humming the melody softly, anchoring each other even now. 2 down, Angelo said hoarsely. 1 more to go. 1 more, Rosalie agreed. Marcos opened the doors to find them like that 2 broken people who'd somehow found a way to be whole together. And the smile on his face suggested he understood exactly what he was seeing. Not a king and a trial participant, but 2 halves of something that was just beginning to remember it had always been meant to be one. Chapter 5. The third moon when the curse finally shattered. The day between the second and third moons passed differently than the first. Where before Rosalie had rested alone in her chambers, recovering from the ordeal, now she and Angelo moved through the fortress together. Not by explicit agreement, but by an unspoken understanding that separation felt wrong. Incomplete. The bond that had formed during the second night hummed between them constantly. Now not uncomfortable, but present, always present. Rosalie could feel Angelo's exhaustion echoing her own, could sense his wariness mixing with cautious hope, and from the way he kept glancing at her when he thought she wasn't looking, she suspected he could feel her emotions just as clearly. They broke their fast together in a small dining room that overlooked the eastern gardens. The food was simple but plentiful, and they ate in companionable silence for a while, both too tired for extensive conversation. But as Rosalie reached for more bread, her sleeve rode up, revealing the scars on her inner wrist, thin silver lines where she'd once tried to end the pain of her first rejection. She pulled her sleeve down quickly, but not quickly enough. "Who hurt you?" Angelo's voice was quiet but edged with something dangerous. "It doesn't matter anymore," Rosalie said, not meeting his eyes. "It matters to me." He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not touching, asking permission. When Rosalie didn't pull away, he gently pushed her sleeve back up, studying the scars with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "These are old. 5, 6 years maybe?" 7, Rosalie admitted. "After the first rejection. Ricky called me defective in front of the entire pack. Said I was damaged goods, that any male who bonded with me would be wasting his bloodline. I was 19 and stupid enough to believe him. Thought maybe everyone would be better off if I just..." She trailed off, the memory still painful despite the years. Angelo's fingers traced the scars with infinite gentleness. "But you didn't. My sister found me," Rosalie said. "Tracy." She was only 17 herself, barely more than a child, but she stopped the bleeding and sat with me all night. Didn't lecture me or tell me I was being foolish. Just held my hand and reminded me that I was more than what Ricky said I was. She finally met Angelo's eyes. It took me a long time to believe her. Sometimes I'm still not sure I do. "I understand that," Angelo said softly. He released her wrist and pushed up his own sleeve, revealing similar scars though his were thicker, deeper, carved with deliberate precision. "After Edna. After I understood what she'd done to me, what I'd become. I thought maybe it would be better for everyone if the curse died with me. If I just ended it before another full moon could turn me into a monster." Rosalie stared at the scars, her chest aching with recognition. "Why didn't you?" "Marcos," Angelo said with a faint smile. "Found me in my chambers with a silver blade at my throat. He was just a junior guard then, barely 20 years old, but he knocked the blade away and said something I've never forgotten. He said, 'A king doesn't get to quit, even when he wants to. Too many people are counting on him to find another way.'" Angelo's smile faded. "So I found another way. Or tried to. Spent 3 years searching for a cure, testing every theory, watching 17 females die, trying to break a curse I'd convinced myself was unbreakable. But it's not, Rosalie said. We proved that. 2 nights, Angelo. 2 nights you've maintained your humanity during the transformation. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Angelo's voice was raw with frustration. I can think. I can speak. Still trapped between forms, still dangerous to everyone around me. The territories are still fracturing because their king is a monster who can't leave his fortress for fear of what he might do. Rosalie heard the despair in his voice. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting for too long with too little hope. She understood it intimately, had carried that same exhaustion through 3 rejections, through years of being told she was worthless, through endless nights wondering if there was any point to continuing. Come with me, she said, suddenly standing. I want to show you something. Angelo looked surprised but followed as she led him through the corridors. She'd explored the fortress during her brief alone time this morning, and she'd found something that made her think of her mother's journal, of hidden truths waiting to be discovered. The fortress's archive room was smaller than the library but somehow more intimate. Shelves lined with leather-bound journals and carefully preserved documents, each one a piece of the Chase family's history. Rosalie moved to the section she'd found earlier, running her fingers along the spines until she located the one she was looking for. This is your great-great-grandmother's journal, she said, pulling it down. Imelda Chase. She ruled for 37 years, from what I could find. And according to the dates, she ruled alone. No mate, no king consort, no bonding ceremony recorded in any of the official documents. Angelo frowned. That's not possible. The laws require an Alpha King to bond within 5 years of taking the throne. It's considered essential for stability, for continuing the bloodline. He stopped, something dawning in his expression. Unless she was Barren. Not Barren, Rosalie said, opening the journal to a passage she'd marked. Read this. Angelo took the journal, his eyes scanning the faded handwriting. The council pressures me daily to choose a mate. They say a queen without a king is incomplete, that I'm failing in my duty by remaining unbonded. But what they don't understand, what they refuse to understand, is that not all power comes from breeding. Not all legacies are carried in children's blood. My gift is my voice, my magic is my song. And the moment I bond with another, the moment I divide my power between myself and a mate, that gift will dilute, will weaken. The territories need me strong, need me whole, need me to be exactly what I am without compromise. They call me selfish, cold, unnatural. They say I'm betraying my bloodline, failing my duty as a female. But I've seen what happens to powerful females who give their strength away for the sake of tradition. I've watched them diminish, watched them fade, watched them become shadows of what they could have been. So I choose myself. I choose my power. I choose to be whole rather than halved, even if it means dying alone. Angelo looked up from the journal, his expression stunned. I never knew. The official records say she was unable to bond for political reasons. I always assumed it meant the council couldn't agree on an appropriate mate. She chose not to bond, Rosalie said. Not because she couldn't, but because bonding would have weakened her gift. The gift that kept the territories stable for nearly 4 decades. She took the journal back, tracing her great-great-grandmother's words. My mother wrote something similar in her journal, about how my barrenness wasn't a curse but a preparation, about how I was never meant to bear children of the flesh because I was meant to bear something more important. The song, Angelo said slowly. Your power, like Imelda's, comes from being whole, undivided. If you'd successfully bonded with any of the males who rejected you, the song might not have worked, Rosalie finished. Or it would have been weaker, less effective. My mother knew, somehow, knew that I needed to be exactly what I am, rejected, unbonded, barren, to be strong enough to face your curse. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of this revelation settling between them. Then Angelo said quietly, so all those years of being called broken, all those rejections, all that pain, it was actually making you into exactly what you needed to be. Maybe, Rosalie said. Or maybe I'm just trying to find meaning in suffering that was always meaningless. She closed Imelda's journal carefully. But either way, I'm here now. We're here now. And we have one more night to get through. Angelo's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. I need to tell you something, he said. Before tonight. Before the third moon. All right. He led her to one of the window seats, and they sat facing each other, knees almost touching. In the afternoon light, Angelo looked younger than his 30 years, or maybe it was just that the constant wariness had faded enough to let her see the man beneath the king's mask. The curse was designed to isolate me, Angelo began. To make it impossible for me to trust anyone, to bond with anyone, to let anyone close enough to help. Edna knew that isolation would be my greatest weakness. And for 3 years, it worked. I pushed everyone away, my council, my guards, the few friends I had left. I told myself it was for their safety, but really. He paused, his jaw tightening. Really, I was just afraid. Afraid of being betrayed again. Afraid of caring about someone and having them use it against me. That's not weakness, Rosalie said softly. That's survival. Maybe. But survival isn't living, is it? Angelo's dark eyes met hers. These past 2 nights with you, feeling the bond forming, letting myself hope that maybe the curse could be broken, it's terrifying, Rosalie. Because if we fail tonight, if the curse adapts again, and I hurt you or worse. His voice cracked. I don't think I'll survive that. Not the guilt of it. Not the weight of another death on my conscience. Rosalie understood what he was really saying. He was giving her an out. One last chance to walk away before the final night, before the bond between them grew too strong to sever without causing irreparable damage to them both. Do you want me to leave? She asked. No, Angelo said immediately, almost desperately. Moon goddess. No. I want you to stay. I want to believe that together we're strong enough to break this thing. He stopped, seemed to gather himself. I want to tell you that even if we fail tonight, these 3 days with you have been worth it. You've given me back pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. You've made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a monster wearing a human face. You were never just a monster, Rosalie said. She reached up, cupping his face with her palm, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. You were a man dealing with an impossible situation, in the only way he knew how. But you don't have to deal with it alone anymore. Angelo's hand covered hers, holding it against his face. The bond between us, he said quietly. The resonance bond. It's getting stronger. I can feel it. Can you? Yes, Rosalie admitted. I can feel your emotions now. Your exhaustion. Your fear. Your hope. It's like there's a thread connecting us. Getting thicker every time we sing together. The texts said resonance bonds can become permanent. Angelo said, if both souls choose it, if both strengthen the connection consciously, it becomes unbreakable. Deeper than pack bonds, deeper than traditional matings, 2 souls becoming one while still remaining distinct. Rosalie's heart was hammering. Are you asking me if I want that, a permanent bond with you? I'm telling you that I already want it, Angelo said, his voice rough with emotion. I've wanted it since the moment you stood in my throne room and said you chose to be here. Since you sang through your fear and anchored my humanity when I was drowning in the beast. Since I watched you stand your ground against a monster and refuse to break. His thumb traced her cheekbone. But I'm also telling you that you deserve better than a cursed king who might never be fully free of what Edna did to him. And I'm telling you that I don't want better, Rosalie said. I want you. The cursed king who's been fighting for 3 years to protect others from himself. The man who drinks tea for a stranger's sore throat. The beast who hummed my lullaby instead of tearing me apart. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. I'm already bonded to you, Angelo. The resonance chose us for each other. All that's left is for us to choose it back. Angelo's breath hitched. If we do this, if we let the bond become permanent, there's no going back. Even if the curse breaks tonight. Even if everything works out perfectly, you'll be tied to me. The territories will expect you to be queen. The packs will scrutinize everything you do. You'll never be free to just walk away. I haven't been free since my mother died, Rosalie said honestly. I've been drifting for 12 years, waiting for someone to tell me I had value, that I mattered, that I was more than just my empty womb. You're the first person who's looked at me and seen strength instead of deficiency. Why would I walk away from that? Because strength shouldn't come at the cost of your freedom. It's not a cost if I'm choosing it freely. Rosalie pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. I choose this bond. I choose you. I choose us. Whatever that looks like after tonight. Something in Angelo's expression cracked the last wall, the final defense he'd been maintaining against hope. Then I choose you too, he whispered. I choose this bond. I choose whatever future we can build together. The words felt like a vow, and the moment they were spoken, Rosalie felt the resonance bond solidify in her chest. It had been building since the first night, growing stronger with each shared song, each moment of vulnerability. But now it locked into place with an almost audible click, becoming something permanent and unshakable. She could feel Angelo's emotions with perfect clarity now, his fear and hope and desperate, fragile love all tangled together. And she knew with absolute certainty that he could feel hers too. The barriers between them had dissolved, leaving only this, two souls resonating at the same frequency, two broken pieces that had somehow learned to be whole together. Tonight, Angelo said, when the third moon rises, we're not just fighting the curse, we're completing the bond. The full resonance bond, the kind the ancient texts describe, two voices becoming one song, two souls becoming one strength. Will that be enough to break the curse entirely? Rosalie asked. I don't know, Angelo admitted, but I know it's our best chance, maybe our only chance. He stood, pulling her up with him, and led her back toward the library. There's one more thing we need to do before tonight. One final verse of the song we haven't practiced yet. What verse? Angelo pulled out both their mother's journals, opening them to the final pages. The ending. The true ending, not the versions either of us learned as children. Both our mothers wrote it but marked it as something that should only be sung when both singers were ready, when both had chosen the bond completely. Rosalie looked at the notation, and her breath caught. The melody was familiar, but the harmonies were complex beyond anything they'd attempted. This wasn't just two voices singing together, this was two voices weaving around each other, creating patterns so intricate they were almost mathematical in their precision. This is going to be hard, she said. Everything worth doing is hard, Angelo replied. He positioned them facing each other, close enough that their joined hands rested between them. We have hours before moonrise. Let's use them to get this right. They practiced through the afternoon, their voices learning the complex interplay of the final verse. Sometimes they'd stumble, lose the rhythm, have to start over, but each time they completed it successfully, the resonance bond hummed with approval, as if recognizing that yes, this was what they were meant to sing. This was the key that would unlock everything. As evening approached and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Marcos appeared at the library door. His expression was grave but not hopeless. The moon rises in 1 hour, Your Majesty. Lady Rosalie. Angelo and Rosalie exchanged a long look, and in that look was everything they'd built over 3 days. Trust, understanding, hope, and something that was beginning to feel like love. Not the desperate, grasping kind of love that demanded and took, but the kind that gave freely, that strengthened rather than diminished, that made both souls more than they could be alone. We're ready, they said in unison, and Marcos's lips quirked in a small smile. Yes, he said. I believe you are. The throne room felt different for the third night. Maybe it was the knowledge that this was the final trial, the last chance to prove the curse could be broken. Or maybe it was simply that Rosalie and Angelo were different now, bonded in ways that went beyond ceremony or tradition, united by something the curse hadn't anticipated. They stood in the center of the room as the last light faded from the sky, hands joined, both their mother's journals tucked safely in Rosalie's pocket. Around them, candles had been lit, Marcos's doing, Rosalie suspected, something to give light when the moon's influence grew too strong. However this ends, Angelo said quietly, his eyes already starting to change as the transformation began. I want you to know that meeting you, singing with you, bonding with you, it was worth it, all of it. Even the curse was worth it if it led me to you. It's not ending, Rosalie said firmly. We're breaking this curse tonight. We're completing the bond. And then we're going to figure out how to put this kingdom back together, one territory at a time. Angelo laughed, though it came out strained as his body began to shift. Ambitious. I learned from the best. The moonlight touched the floor, silver and relentless, and the transformation accelerated. But this time, Rosalie and Angelo were ready. They began singing immediately, their voices launching into perfect harmony before the curse could fully take hold. The golden shimmer appeared between them, stronger than it had ever been, wrapping around Angelo like armor. The beast that emerged was different from the previous nights. Smaller, more controlled, with eyes that held far more humanity than monster. And when it opened its fanged mouth to continue the harmony, the sound that came out was almost beautiful. Rough and wild, yes, but undeniably musical. They sang through the first verses, their voices weaving the shield and sword melodies together, building power with every note. The golden shimmer expanded, filling the throne room with light that pushed back against the shadows the curse tried to create. Rosalie could feel the curse fighting back, trying to separate them, trying to silence one or both voices. But the resonance bond held. Every time the curse surged stronger, the bond pulsed in response, feeding strength from one soul to the other. When Rosalie's voice began to tire, Angelo's grew louder, carrying them both. When the beast's control wavered, Rosalie's melody anchored it back to humanity. They were no longer two separate beings fighting the curse. They were one unified force, and the curse had no defense against that. Hours passed. The moon climbed toward its apex. And finally, as midnight approached, they reached the moment they'd been building toward all night. The final verse. The one their mothers had written but marked as something that should only be sung when both singers were ready to complete the bond. Rosalie met the beast's two human eyes and saw Angelo looking back at her. Saw his determination, his hope, his absolute trust that together they could do this. "Ready?" she asked. The beast nodded. They began the final verse. The harmonies were impossibly complex, their voices weaving around each other in patterns that seemed to defy the laws of music itself. But somehow, impossibly, they hit every note. The shield and sword melodies intertwined until they became something entirely new, not one or the other, but both at once, a whole greater than the sum of its parts. The golden shimmer exploded outward, filling the entire throne room with light so bright Rosalie had to close her eyes. She felt Angelo's presence through the bond, not just his emotions now, but his very essence. His strength became her strength. His humanity became her anchor, and her courage became his weapon against the curse that had held him prisoner for 3 years. The final note rang out, pure and clear and absolutely perfect, and the curse shattered. Rosalie felt it break, actually felt it, like chains falling away, like prison walls crumbling to dust. Through the bond, she experienced Angelo's transformation reversing. Not because the moon was setting, but because the thing forcing the transformation no longer had power over him. The light faded gradually, and when Rosalie could see again, Angelo stood before her in his human form, completely human, despite the moon still riding high overhead. His skin was unmarked by fur, his eyes their normal dark brown, his hands perfectly human with no trace of claws. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other, hardly daring to believe it had actually worked. Then Angelo laughed a sound of pure, disbelieving joy and pulled Rosalie into his arms. She went willingly, wrapping herself around him, and they stood there in the center of the throne room, holding each other as if they could merge into a single being through sheer force of will. "It's broken," Angelo said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Moon goddess, Rosalie, it's actually broken. I can feel it. The curse is gone. We broke it," Rosalie corrected, pulling back enough to see his face. Together, Angelo agreed. He cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "My shield, my song, my salvation, my sword, my harmony, my home." The words felt like another vow, and the resonance bond pulsed with satisfied warmth. They'd done it. Against all odds, against 3 years of failures, against 17 deaths and countless doubts, they'd broken a curse designed by a master manipulator who'd known exactly what she was doing. Because Edna had been wrong about one thing, isolation wasn't Angelo's greatest weakness. Connection was his greatest strength. The throne room doors burst open, and Marcos rushed in, followed by 6 other guards. They all stopped short, staring at Angelo in his human form, at the complete absence of any beast, at the way he and Rosalie stood together glowing with residual golden light. "Your Majesty?" Marcos's voice was tentative, hardly daring to hope. "It's broken, Marcos," Angelo said, and his smile was radiant. "The curse is broken. She broke it. We broke it. Together." The guards erupted in cheers so loud they echoed through the entire fortress. Marcos had tears streaming down his face, and several of the other guards weren't far behind. This was what they'd been hoping for, praying for, fighting for through 3 long years of watching their king suffer. And it had finally, miraculously, impossibly happened. A celebration erupted around them. Angelo leaned down and whispered in Rosalie's ear, "Stay with me. Not just tonight, but always. Be my queen, my bondmate, my partner in everything. Help me rebuild what the curse broke. Help me become the king I was always supposed to be." Rosalie didn't hesitate. Yes, to all of it. Yes. They'd survived 3 nights, broken a curse, completed a resonance bond that would last the rest of their lives and beyond. Now came the hard part, figuring out how to actually live in the world they'd just won the right to inhabit. But as Angelo's arms tightened around her, and the resonance bond hummed with contentment, Rosalie thought that maybe, just maybe, the hard part would be worth it too. After all, they'd already proven that together, they could accomplish the impossible. What was rebuilding a kingdom compared to that? Chapter 6. The offer that could save thousands or destroy her. The fortress transformed overnight. Where before there had been an atmosphere of quiet desperation, guards walking on eggshells, servants whispering in corners, the whole place holding its breath against the next full moon. Now there was something Rosalie had never expected to find in the Crimson Throne. Joy. Guards smiled openly. Servants hummed while they worked. The council members who'd been summoned at dawn arrived to find their king standing in the great hall in full daylight, completely human, with no trace of the beast that had terrorized them for 3 years. Several of them wept openly. Others fell to their knees in gratitude to the moon goddess. And through it all, Angelo kept Rosalie at his side. His hand never strayed far from hers, as if he needed the constant physical reminder that she was real, that the bond was real, that the curse truly was broken. They were in the council chamber now, 3 days after the 3rd moon. Angelo sat at the head of a long table carved from black stone, with Rosalie in the seat of honor to his right, the queen's seat, though no formal bonding ceremony had taken place yet. The council members, 12 representatives from different territories, all older males who'd served Angelo's father, watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. "Gentlemen," Angelo said, his voice carrying the authority of a king who'd just accomplished the impossible, "I present Lady Rosalie Ramirez, who broke the curse that held me captive for 3 years. She will be formally recognized as my bondmate and queen at the next new moon, with a ceremony open to representatives from all territories." The council erupted in discussion, voices overlapping. Most of it was positive congratulations, expressions of gratitude, relief that the curse was finally broken. But one voice cut through the celebration with the precision of a blade. "With all due respect, Your Majesty," said Carl Carver, the eldest council member and representative from the Western Territories, "while we're all grateful for Lady Rosalie's intervention, the matter of your bonding requires careful consideration. The choice of queen affects all territories, and tradition dictates that the council should have input on such a significant decision." Rosalie felt Angelo stiffen beside her, felt his irritation through the bond, but his voice remained calm when he replied, "Lady Rosalie and I share a resonance bond, Carl. Not a political arrangement or a council-approved match. The bond chose us for each other, and we chose to accept it. That's not subject to council approval." "A resonance bond," Carl repeated, skepticism clear in his tone. "Forgive me, Your Majesty, but such bonds are the stuff of legend. How can we be certain that what you share is truly a primordial connection, and not simply gratitude, affection born of crisis?" "Because I can feel her emotions," Angelo said flatly. "Right now, she's annoyed at your condescension but trying not to show it. She's also exhausted because neither of us has slept properly in 3 days, and she's worried that this meeting is going to turn into a political nightmare." He glanced at Rosalie, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Am I close?" "Disturbingly accurate," Rosalie admitted, and several council members chuckled. But Carl persisted. Even so, the territories are fractured. Many packs have used your condition as justification for ignoring the authority of the Crimson Throne. Your bonding to Lady Rosalie needs to be a statement, a demonstration of strength that will bring the territories back into alignment, which means you want me to bond with someone politically advantageous, Angelo interrupted, his voice hardening. Someone from a powerful bloodline. Someone who can bring alliances and territory agreements as a dowry. Someone who isn't a rejected wolf with no pack affiliation and a barren womb. The bluntness of his words created a heavy silence. Rosalie felt shame try to claw its way up her throat. The old, familiar shame of being reminded exactly what she wasn't, what she could never be. But beneath the shame, she felt Angelo's fierce protectiveness through the bond, his absolute refusal to let anyone diminish her worth. That's not what I'm suggesting, Carl said, though his tone suggested it was exactly what he was suggesting. I'm merely pointing out that the Queen's role includes producing heirs, continuing the bloodline, ensuring stability for future generations. If Lady Rosalie is unable to fulfill that role, then we'll find another solution, Angelo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Adoption. Naming an heir from another line, changing the succession laws entirely. The territories have operated for 1,000 years with various approaches to succession. We'll figure it out, Your Majesty. This discussion is closed, Carl. Angelo's tone carried the weight of absolute authority. I will bond with Rosalie at the new moon. You will all attend and bear witness. And if any territory has objections to my choice of queen, they're welcome to bring those objections directly to me, in person, so I can explain in great detail exactly why those objections are irrelevant. He stood, and the council scrambled to stand with him. This meeting is adjourned. As the council members filed out, Rosalie caught the looks several of them exchanged. Some were supportive, clearly moved by the story of the curse being broken, but others, Carl included, wore expressions of calculation that made her uneasy. This wasn't over, she realized. The political maneuvering was just beginning. Once they were alone, Angelo pulled Rosalie into his arms, pressing his forehead against hers. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I knew the council would be difficult, but I didn't expect Carl to be so blatant about it. He has a point, though, Rosalie said, hating the words even as she spoke them. I can't give you heirs. The territories will see that as weakness. They'll use it against you. Let them try. Angelo's arms tightened around her. I didn't break a 3-year curse just to let a council of old males dictate who I bond with. You're mine, Rosalie. Mine to protect, mine to cherish, mine to stand beside. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me personally. The fierceness in his voice made Rosalie's chest ache. This was what she'd never had with any of her previous mates, someone who defended her, who saw her worth regardless of what she couldn't provide. Someone who chose her not despite her barrenness, but because of everything else she was. I love you, she said, the words surprising her even as they left her mouth. She hadn't meant to say them, hadn't planned this moment, but suddenly they were there, hanging in the air between them. Angelo pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes wide with something that looked like wonder. Say that again. I love you, Rosalie repeated, more confidently this time. I know it's only been a few days. I know it's probably too soon, but the bond, the way I can feel you, the way we fit together, Angelo. I love you. Completely. Terrifyingly. In a way that makes everything else in my life feel like it was just preparation for finding you. Moon goddess, Angelo breathed. Then he was kissing her, deep and desperate and full of all the emotion he couldn't put into words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his lips to her forehead and whispered, I love you too. Have loved you since you stood in my throne room and chose to face a monster. Since you sang through your fear and gave me back my humanity. Since you proved that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other and the resonance bond that pulsed with golden warmth between them. For the first time since the curse broke, Rosalie let herself believe this might actually work. That despite the political complications and the council's objections and her inability to provide heirs, they could build something lasting together. Then Marcos burst into the council chamber, his face pale with urgency. Your Majesty, there's a situation. You need to come to the main gate immediately." The situation turned out to be an envoy from the Southern Territories. A dozen armed wolves, led by a female Rosalie vaguely recognized from pack gatherings years ago. Patty Spears, a high-ranking member of one of the most powerful Southern packs, known for her political acumen and ruthless ambition. She stood just outside the fortress gates, flanked by her guards, radiating the kind of confidence that came from knowing you held valuable cards in a high-stakes game. When Angelo and Rosalie appeared, Patty's eyes flicked between them with calculating interest. "Your Majesty," Patty said, bowing just deeply enough to be respectful, but not deeply enough to show true deference. "Congratulations on breaking your curse. The Southern Territories have been eagerly awaiting this news." "I'm sure they have," Angelo said coolly. "What brings you to the Crimson Throne, Patty?" "An offer." Patty's smile was sharp. "The Southern Packs are prepared to formally acknowledge your authority and rejoin the unified territories. We'll provide military support, trade agreements, and full cooperation with all Crown policies. In exchange for a bonding alliance, your formal bonding to Anastasia Reyes, daughter of the Southern Alpha Prime. She's of excellent bloodline, fertile, politically connected, and trained in governance since childhood. Everything a queen should be." Patty's eyes flicked to Rosalie. Dismissive. "I understand you've formed an attachment to the female who broke your curse, and that's understandable. But attachment and political wisdom are different things. The Reyes family is prepared to be generous. Lady Rosalie could be given estate, a title, provisions for life. She'd be well cared for." Rosalie felt Angelo's rage through the bond, felt him preparing to unleash it on Patty with devastating force. But before he could speak, she squeezed his hand, a silent request to let her handle this. "You're offering me money to step aside?" Rosalie said, her voice deceptively calm. "To walk away from my bondmate so the king can make a politically convenient match?" "I'm offering you security," Patty corrected. "You're unbonded, packless, with no political connections, and no ability to produce heirs. You broke the curse, and that's admirable, heroic, even. But now the curse is broken, and the king needs to think about the future of the territories, not just his personal feelings." "The future of the territories," Rosalie repeated slowly. Then she turned to Angelo. "Is this what your council wants? What Carl was hinting at during the meeting?" Angelo's jaw was clenched so tight she worried he might crack his teeth. "Probably. The Southern Territories have been the most resistant to my authority since the curse began. An alliance through bonding would solve a lot of political problems. It would also solve the heir issue," Patty added helpfully. "Anastasia has already borne 2 healthy pups from a previous bond. Her fertility is proven. She could give you the heirs the territories need for stability." Rosalie felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was what she'd feared, wasn't it? That breaking the curse would only be the beginning. That the real challenges would come after, when Angelo had to balance his personal desires against his responsibilities as king. "Give us a moment," Angelo said to Patty, his voice tight with controlled fury. He pulled Rosalie away from the gate, toward a private alcove where they couldn't be overheard. The moment they were alone, he exploded. "This is insane," he hissed. "I'm not bonding with some stranger because the Southern Packs decided to hold their support hostage. I'm not trading you for political convenience." "But you need them," Rosalie interrupted quietly. "Don't you? The Southern Territories, their support, their cooperation. You said yourself the territories are fractured. If bonding with Anastasia would bring them back into the fold." "No." Angelo gripped her shoulders. "Rosalie, no. I don't care about political advantage. I don't care about heirs or bloodlines or any of it. I care about you. About us. About the bond we built together. The resonance bond," Rosalie said, her throat tight. "Which is still there, still strong, even if you bond with someone else politically. Resonance bonds don't break just because other bonds form." Angelo stared at her like she'd struck him. "You're actually considering this. You're actually thinking about walking away." "I'm thinking about what's best for the territories," Rosalie said, even as everything in her screamed to reject this entire conversation. "You're the king, Angelo. Your choices affect thousands of wolves. And if your choice to bond with me, Barren, packless, politically useless. Me causes the southern territories to remain fractured, causes continued instability and conflict. Then that's on them, not you. Angelo's voice was raw. You are not politically useless. You broke a curse that 17 other females died attempting. You gave me back my humanity. You completed a resonance bond that texts say only appears once in a generation. That's not nothing, Rosalie. That's everything. But it's not heirs, Rosalie whispered. It's not bloodline continuation. It's not the things a king actually needs from his queen. It's what I need, Angelo said desperately. You, just you, exactly as you are. Rosalie closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. The bond between them pulsed with anguish, his and hers, so intertwined now she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. She wanted to say yes, wanted to ignore Patty's offer and the council's objections and all the practical realities of ruling a fractured kingdom. But she'd spent 12 years being told she wasn't enough. 12 years of failing to provide what her mates needed, watching them find other females who could give them what she couldn't. And despite everything Angelo said, despite the resonance bond and the broken curse and the love she knew he felt for her, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, what if he's wrong? What if choosing you really does damn the territories to continued fracturing? What if your barrenness really is the selfish choice that hurts everyone? I need to think, Rosalie said, pulling away from him. I need time to talk yourself into sacrificing our bond for political stability? Angelo's voice cracked. Time to convince yourself you're not worth fighting for. Time to figure out if I'm strong enough to be what you need me to be. Rosalie corrected. Give me today. Let me think without the bond pulling at me, without your feelings mixing with mine. Please, Angelo. He looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to rage and refuse and physically prevent her from leaving his side. But finally he nodded. One day. But Rosalie? He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. Don't you dare convince yourself that I'd be better off without you. Don't you dare believe Patty's poison about political convenience being more important than what we have. Because I'm telling you right now, I will burn every alliance, fracture every territory, rule over ashes before I give you up. That's what I'm afraid of, Rosalie whispered. She pulled her hand free and walked away before he could see her cry. Rosalie spent the day in her chambers, alternating between staring at the walls and rereading her mother's journal. She'd been so certain when she came here, so sure that her purpose was to break the curse, to complete the resonance bond, to help Angelo become the king he was meant to be. But she hadn't considered what came after, hadn't thought about the political realities of a cursed king bonding with a barren female, hadn't anticipated that breaking the curse would only be the first challenge, that the real test would come when Angelo had to choose between personal happiness and the good of his kingdom. Your barrenness is not a curse, it is a preparation. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. But preparation for what? Breaking the curse, yes, but what about after? Was she supposed to step aside now, having served her purpose? Let Angelo bond politically while she carried the resonance bond alone, forever connected to a man who belonged to someone else? The thought made her physically ill, but so did the thought of Angelo sacrificing his kingdom's stability for her, of watching the territories fracture further, because he chose personal desire over political wisdom, of being the reason he failed as a king. A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. Come in, she called, expecting Marcos, or perhaps one of the servants. Instead, Carl Carver entered, his expression grave but not unkind. Lady Rosalie, may I speak with you? Every instinct told her to refuse, to send him away, to avoid whatever political manipulation he was about to attempt. But she'd asked for time to think, and part of thinking meant hearing perspectives she didn't want to hear. All right, she said. Carl sat in the chair across from her, his movements careful and deliberate. For a long moment he just studied her, and Rosalie forced herself not to fidget under his scrutiny. You love him, Carl said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes. And he loves you. That much is obvious to anyone with eyes. Carl leaned forward. But love and leadership are not always compatible, Lady Rosalie. Sometimes a king must choose the good of many over the happiness of one, even if that one is himself. Are you here to convince me to accept Patty's offer? Rosalie asked flatly. I'm here to give you information so you can make an informed decision. Carl pulled a rolled document from his coat. These are reports from the southern territories over the past 3 years. Skirmishes between packs, territory disputes that have turned violent, trade routes that have been abandoned because no one trusts the stability of the region. 37 deaths, Lady Rosalie. 37 wolves dead, because the territories lack strong central authority. He unrolled the document, and Rosalie saw names, dates, circumstances. A female killed in a border dispute. A male murdered over a trade disagreement. Children caught in crossfire between feuding packs. Her stomach churned. The southern territories represent nearly 40% of the total wolf population, Carl continued. If they formally rejoin under the Crimson Throne's authority, that influence could stabilize the other regions, could prevent more deaths like these, could give Angelo the power base he needs to actually unite the territories the way his father did. And all it costs is my bond with him, Rosalie said bitterly. No. Carl's voice was surprisingly gentle. The resonance bond remains. Patty herself acknowledged that. You would still be connected to Angelo. Still able to support him. Still able to be part of his life. Just not as his queen. Not in the political role that requires heirs and bloodline continuation and all the things you cannot provide. So I'd be what? His mistress? His secret bond partner that everyone knows about but officially ignores. You'd be the woman who saved his life, and then saved his kingdom, Carl said. You'd be honored, respected, provided for. And more importantly, you'd be the reason the territories finally reunified. The reason those 37 deaths don't become 300, or 3,000. That's not nothing, Lady Rosalie. That's a legacy. Rosalie wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the cold political logic of it. But she couldn't stop staring at the names on Carl's report. 37 wolves dead, families destroyed, children orphaned, all because the territories lacked central authority. All because Angelo had been weakened by the curse she'd broken. If I agree to this, Rosalie said slowly, if I step aside and let him bond with Anastasia, what guarantee do I have that the southern territories will actually honor their agreement? That they won't just take what they want and continue causing problems? You have my word, Carl said, and more importantly, you have the leverage of the resonance bond itself. Angelo will never fully bond with Anastasia the way he's bonded with you. The southern packs know this. They're not asking for his heart, just his political alliance. That's a trade they're willing to make in good faith. Good faith. The words tasted like ash in Rosalie's mouth, but she thought about Angelo's fierce declaration earlier. I will burn every alliance, fracture every territory, rule over ashes before I give you up. What if he meant that? What if he actually did choose her over political stability, and the territories descended into chaos because of it? How many more names would end up on Carl's report? How much blood would be on her hands because she was too selfish to step aside? I need to think, Rosalie said again. Carl nodded and stood. Of course. But Lady Rosalie? Whatever you decide, know that I don't question your love for Angelo, or his for you. I'm simply asking you to consider whether love is enough when balanced against the lives of thousands. He left, and Rosalie was alone again with her thoughts, and her mother's journal and the terrible weight of the decision she was being forced to make. She opened the journal to the final page, the one she'd read a dozen times already. Some songs, my daughter, are meant to be sung alone, not because they're not beautiful when harmonized, but because their purpose is singular, specific. They exist to accomplish one thing. And once that thing is done, the song must end, or transform into something new. Rosalie stared at those words, and for the first time, she wondered if her mother had foreseen this too. If the song was meant to break the curse and complete the bond, yes, but also to prepare Rosalie for the hardest choice of all, loving someone enough to let them go. Chapter 7. The letter she left while he slept. Rosalie made her decision at dawn. She'd spent the entire night sitting at the window, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the resonance bond pulse with Angelo's restless sleep from somewhere in the fortress. He was dreaming. She could feel the edges of his dreams through their connection, fragments of images that mixed hope and fear in equal measure, dreams of her leaving, dreams of the territories burning, dreams of choosing between love and duty and somehow losing both. She knew because she'd been having the same dreams. When the first light touched the horizon, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Rosalie pulled out a piece of parchment and began to write. Her hand shook so badly that the first few attempts were illegible, but she forced herself to continue. This needed to be said, and she couldn't trust herself to say it to Angelo's face. Not when the bond would let him feel every ounce of her anguish, her doubt, her desperate hope that she was making the right choice. Angelo, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not far, I can't go far. The bond won't let me. Not without causing us both pain. But far enough that you can't immediately find me. Far enough that you'll have time to think clearly, without my emotions tangling with yours. I'm not leaving because I don't love you. Moon Goddess, I love you more than I thought possible. More than I knew I was capable of. But love isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes love means making the hard choice. The choice that hurts in the short term but helps in the long term. You need the Southern Territories. You need their support, their allegiance, their help in reuniting the fractured packs, and I can't give you that. All I can give you is a bond without heirs, a queen without political connections, a mate who will always be seen as less than by those who matter. Carl showed me the reports. 37 deaths in 3 years. All because the territories lack strong central authority. How many more will die if you choose me over stability? How many names will be added to that list because you were too stubborn to make the practical choice? I know you'll rage at this. I know you'll say you don't care about practical, that you'd rather rule over ashes than give me up. But I care, Angelo. I care about those 37 wolves. I care about the hundreds or thousands more who might die if the territories remain fractured. And I care about you, about your legacy, about your purpose as king, about the prophecy that said you were meant to unite the packs. So I'm making the choice you can't make. I'm stepping aside. Bond with Anastasia. Secure the Southern Territories. Do what needs to be done to bring peace and stability to the kingdom. And I'll be here, on the edges, still connected through the resonance bond, still supporting you in the ways that I can. Carl said I could still be part of your life, just not as your queen. I'm choosing to believe that's enough. I'm choosing to believe that saving your kingdom is more important than my happiness. I'm choosing to believe that this is what my mother meant when she wrote about the song transforming into something new. That maybe breaking the curse was just the first verse. And this sacrifice is the second. I love you. I will always love you. The resonance bond ensures I'll feel you. Be connected to you. For the rest of my life. That will have to be enough. Please don't hate me for this. Please understand. Please be the king the territories need you to be. Yours. Even in distance, Rosalie. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it with wax, and left it on the table in Angelo's study where he'd be sure to find it. Then she gathered her few possessions, her mother's journal, the clothes Marcos had provided, a small amount of silver from the provisions Angelo had insisted she accept, and slipped out of the fortress before anyone else was awake. The resonance bond pulled at her with every step, a physical ache in her chest that intensified the further she went. But she forced herself forward, down the mountain path, toward the small village that sat at the base of the Crimson Throne's territory, far enough to give Angelo space, close enough that the bond wouldn't tear them both apart. She'd made it perhaps 2 miles when she felt Angelo wake. Felt the exact moment he discovered she was gone. Felt his confusion spike into panic, and then explode into rage. Through the bond she heard him roar her name, felt him reaching for her presence like a drowning man reaching for shore. Rosalie, where are you? What have you done? She could answer through the bond if she wanted to. Could let him into her mind, let him feel her location, let him track her down within minutes, but that would defeat the entire purpose of leaving. So instead, she wrapped her mental shields as tightly as she could, blocking out his desperate attempts to connect, and kept walking. The village of Redstone sat in a valley carved by glaciers thousands of years ago, its buildings made from the same crimson stone as the fortress above. It was small, maybe 200 residents, most of whom served the Crimson Throne in some capacity or another. Rosalie had been through here once with Dennis and Daryl on the journey north, and she remembered a small inn on the eastern edge that catered to travelers. The innkeeper, an older female named Lucille, looked up in surprise when Rosalie entered. "Lady Rosalie? I heard you were at the fortress. That you broke the king's curse." "I did," Rosalie said, her voice flat with exhaustion. "Now I need a room. Something long-term. A month. Maybe longer. I can pay. Lucille studied her with shrewd eyes. And Rosalie knew the innkeeper could sense the bond pulling at her, could probably feel the emotional turmoil radiating off her in waves. But to her credit, Lucille didn't ask questions. She just nodded and led Rosalie to a small room on the second floor with a window that faced north toward the fortress. It's not fancy, Lucille said, but it's clean and quiet. And if you need anything, food, privacy, someone to talk to you, just let me know. Thank you, Rosalie whispered. She spent the first week in a haze of grief and second-guessing. The resonance bond was a constant presence, pulling at her chest, reminding her with every breath that she'd left half of herself on that mountain. She could feel Angelo's emotions through it, his rage, his pain, his desperate attempts to understand why she'd left. Several times, she felt him start toward the village, felt his determination to find her and drag her back to the fortress. But each time, something stopped him. Duty, maybe, or the knowledge that if he forced her to return, she'd only leave again. The bond showed her glimpses of his days. Meetings with the council, negotiations with Patty in the Southern Territories, preparations for the political bonding with Anastasia that everyone except Angelo seemed to want. And through it all, Rosalie felt his love for her. Constant, unwavering, angry love that refused to accept her decision, even as he went through the motions of following it. On the 8th day, Marcos found her. She was sitting in the inn's small garden, attempting to eat breakfast despite her complete lack of appetite, when he appeared in the doorway. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes and his uniform less pristine than usual. He sent you, Rosalie said. It wasn't a question. Actually, no. Marcos sat across from her without being invited. He forbade anyone from coming to find you. Said if you wanted space, you'd have space, even if it killed him to give it to you. But I came anyway because someone needs to tell you what's happening up there. I can feel what's happening through the bond, Rosalie said quietly. He's in pain, furious with me, but also going through with the political preparations, because that's what I asked him to do. He's destroying himself, Marcos corrected bluntly. He hasn't slept properly in 8 days, barely eats, spends every night in the throne room staring at the spot where you sang together, trying to feel your presence through the bond. The council thinks he's finally making the practical choice, but I've served Angelo for a decade, Lady Rosalie. I know what he looks like when he's dying. And he's dying now, just slower than when he had the curse. Rosalie's chest constricted. He'll recover. Once he bonds with Anastasia, once the territories stabilize, once he has a purpose beyond you, Marcos interrupted. There is no beyond you. You're his resonance bond, his other half. The council might not understand what that means, but I've read the texts. I know what happens when resonance-bonded souls are forcibly separated. They survive, technically, but they're never whole again, never truly themselves. They spend the rest of their lives feeling like they're missing a vital organ, like they're only half awake. Better half awake than dead, Rosalie said, thinking of Carl's report. Better diminished than responsible for hundreds of deaths because the territories remain fractured. Marcos leaned forward, his expression intense. You know what I think? I think you're afraid. Rosalie's head snapped up. Excuse me? You're afraid that Angelo will eventually realize you're not worth the sacrifice, that you're not worth choosing over political stability and heirs and all the things a king is supposed to want. So you're leaving first, before he can decide you're not enough. You're taking the choice away from him because you're terrified of what he might choose if given the chance. The words hit like physical blows, each one landing with devastating accuracy. I'm not. Yes, you are. Marcos's voice was gentle but relentless. And I understand why. 12 years of rejections, 12 years of being told you're broken. That kind of damage doesn't heal overnight just because one man tells you you're worth fighting for. But Rosalie, Angelo isn't those other males. He sees your worth, and he's choosing you. Over and over again, he's choosing you. The only person who doesn't believe you deserve to be chosen is you. Rosalie felt tears burning in her eyes. What about the Southern Territories? What about Carl's report, the 37 deaths, the instability? Carl is playing you, Marco said flatly. Oh, the report is real. The deaths happened. But Carl didn't mention that 23 of those deaths were from internal pack conflicts that would have occurred regardless of who sat on the Crimson Throne. He didn't mention that the Southern Territories have been testing boundaries and causing problems since long before Angelo's curse. They're not fractured because Angelo is weak. They're fractured because Patty and her allies want independence. And they're using the curse as an excuse. Rosalie stared at him. But Carl said, Carl wants stability above all else. And he genuinely believes a political bonding with Anastasia would achieve that. He's not lying. Exactly. Just presenting facts in the way that serves his agenda. Marcos pulled out his own document, newer, more detailed. These are the actual territorial reports for the past 3 years. Yes, there have been problems, but most of them were already resolving before the curse broke. And the Southern Territories? They're the ones causing the majority of the issues, using the power vacuum to grab territory and influence. Bonding Angelo to Anastasia won't fix that. It'll just give them leverage over the throne. Rosalie took the document with shaking hands, scanning the detailed reports. Marcos was right. The picture was far more complex than Carl had presented. The Southern Territories weren't some innocent faction waiting for stable leadership. They were actively destabilizing things to increase their own power. Why didn't Carl tell me this? She asked. Because he genuinely believes his solution is best, and the ends justify the means. Marcos shrugged. He's not a bad male, Rosalie. Just a pragmatic one who's more interested in political outcomes than individual happiness. Rosalie set the document down, her mind reeling. So all of this leaving, asking Angelo to bond politically, trying to sacrifice our connection for stability, it was based on incomplete information? And fear, Marcos added gently. Fear that you're not worth choosing. Fear that loving you will damn Angelo to failure. Fear that accepting your own worth means believing you deserve something you've been told all your life you don't deserve. The truth of his words settled over Rosalie like a weight. He was right. All of it was right. She'd fled not because staying would harm the territories, but because staying required believing she was worth the complications her presence would cause. Required accepting that maybe, just maybe, she actually was enough exactly as she was. He'll never forgive me for this, Rosalie whispered. For leaving, for doubting him, for believing Carl over him. He'll forgive you, Marcos said with absolute certainty. Because he loves you. Because he understands fear and doubt better than almost anyone. Because his own scars match yours, and matching scars know how to heal together. He stood, preparing to leave. But Rosalie, you need to go back. Soon. Because while Angelo will survive your absence, he'll never thrive without you. And the territories don't need a surviving king, they need a thriving one. After Marcos left, Rosalie sat in the garden for hours, staring at the reports, feeling the resonance bond pull at her chest. She could sense Angelo through their connection, his exhaustion, his pain, his stubborn determination to respect her choice even though it was killing him. And beneath all of that she felt his love. Steady and unwavering despite everything. She thought about the past 8 days. About how the bond had been a constant ache. How every moment away from him felt like missing a vital part of herself. About how she'd been so focused on what she couldn't give him that she'd completely ignored what she could. Her song, her strength, her unwavering support. Her complete understanding of what it meant to be broken and still keep fighting. She thought about Imelda's journal. About choosing herself and her power rather than diminishing for tradition's sake. She thought about her mother's final message. Some songs transform into something new. Maybe this was the transformation. Not stepping aside, but stepping forward. Not sacrificing her bond for political stability, but fighting for her bond and trusting that everything else would follow. Rosalie stood, decision crystallizing into certainty. She was done running, done letting fear make her choices. Done believing that being Barren made her less worthy of love and respect and partnership. She was going back to the Crimson Throne. She was going back to Angelo. And she was going to fight like hell to keep what they'd built together. The fortress guards recognized her immediately when she appeared at the gates 3 hours later, travel-worn and determined. One of them, a young male named Milton, actually broke into a grin. Lady Rosalie, does this mean, where is he? Rosalie interrupted. The throne room. He's been there since dawn. Milton's grin faded into concern. Lady Rosalie, He's not well. Hasn't been since you left. Maybe warn him before you. But Rosalie was already moving, her feet carrying her through corridors she'd memorized during her brief time here. Through the great hall, up the stairs, past the portraits of Angelo's ancestors. The resonance bond pulled her forward like a lodestone, growing stronger with every step, humming with anticipation. She pushed open the throne room doors. Angelo sat on the floor in the center of the room, his back against the black throne, wearing the same clothes she'd last seen him in 8 days ago. He looked terrible, gaunt, exhausted, barely holding himself together. But the moment she appeared, his head snapped up, and the expression that crossed his face was pure, devastating relief. "Rosalie," he breathed. She crossed the space between them, and then she was in his arms and he was holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and neither of them seemed capable of letting go. "I'm sorry," Rosalie said, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I'm so sorry. I was afraid and stupid, and Carl manipulated me, and I should have trusted you, should have believed that we could figure it out together instead of running." "Stop," Angelo said, his voice rough. "Stop apologizing. You were protecting me, trying to save me from having to make an impossible choice. I understand, Rosalie. I hate it, but I understand." "Marcos told me the truth," Rosalie continued, pulling back enough to see his face. "About Carl's reports, about the Southern Territories, about how I was basing my decision on incomplete information and my own fear of not being enough." "You've always been enough," Angelo said fiercely. "More than enough. Everything I need and everything I want wrapped into one stubborn, courageous, impossibly selfless person." "I'm staying," Rosalie said. "I'm staying. And I'm not stepping aside for Anastasia. And if the council has a problem with that, they can take it up with both of us. Together. Because that's what resonance-bonded mates do, they face things together." Angelo's laugh was wet with tears. "Moon goddess. I love you. I love you so much it actually hurts." "I love you too," Rosalie said. "And I'm done letting fear make me believe I don't deserve that love." They kissed then, desperate and fierce and full of 8 days' worth of separation and pain and stubborn, relentless hope. The resonance bond blazed between them, golden and warm, stronger now than it had been before. As if the separation, as painful as it was, had only proven what they both needed to know. That this bond was real, permanent, and worth fighting for. When they finally broke apart, Angelo pressed his forehead to hers. "The council is meeting this afternoon. Patty and the Southern delegation will be there. They're expecting me to announce my bonding to Anastasia." "What are you going to announce?" Rosalie asked. Angelo's smile was sharp and dangerous and absolutely beautiful. "That I'm bonding with you at the new moon as originally planned. That any territory that has a problem with my choice of queen is welcome to challenge me directly. And that the era of the Crimson Throne being manipulated by political factions is officially over." "That's going to cause problems," Rosalie warned. "Good," Angelo said. "I'm done playing politics with my personal life. Done letting people like Carl and Patty tell me what I should want. I'm the Alpha King, and it's time I started acting like it." Rosalie felt a fierce pride surge through her chest. This was the king Angelo was meant to be, not diminished by curse or fear or political maneuvering, but strong in his convictions and unwavering in his choices. "Then let's go tell them together," she said. They stood, hands joined, and walked toward the council chamber side by side. Whatever came next, political fallout, territorial challenges, the council's disapproval, they would face it together. Because that was what the song had been teaching them all along. That 2 voices in harmony were stronger than any single voice alone. That completion came not from being without flaws, but from finding someone whose flaws fit yours like puzzle pieces. That love wasn't about being perfect. It was about being brave enough to choose each other, over and over again, no matter what the world said you should choose instead. Chapter 8, The Wedding Ambush. The council chamber had never felt so much like a battlefield. Rosalie stood beside Angelo at the head of the long table, acutely aware of every eye fixed on them. The 12 council members sat in their designated seats, their expressions ranging from cautiously optimistic to openly hostile. Carl Carver looked particularly grim, his jaw set in a way that suggested he knew exactly what was coming and disapproved entirely. But it was the Southern delegation that dominated the room's energy. Patty Spears sat at the opposite end of the table, flanked by 6 of her strongest warriors, and beside her, in a seat of honor that made Rosalie's stomach turn, sat Anastasia Reyes. She was beautiful, Rosalie had to admit. Tall and elegant, with dark hair that fell in perfect waves past her shoulders and eyes that assessed everything with cool intelligence. She wore clothes that screamed wealth and status, fine silks in deep purple, jewelry that caught the light with every movement. And when she looked at Angelo, her expression was one of patient expectation, as if his bonding to her was already a foregone conclusion. "Your Majesty," Patty said, rising with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're honored you've called this meeting. I trust you've had time to consider our offer?" "I have," Angelo said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "and I've reached a decision regarding my bonding." The room went silent. Rosalie felt the resonance bond pulse with Angelo's determination, felt his absolute certainty in what he was about to do. She squeezed his hand, offering silent support, and felt his gratitude flow back through their connection. "Lady Anastasia," Angelo continued, addressing her directly, "I appreciate the offer from the Southern Territories, and I recognize the political advantages such a bonding would bring. However, I must respectfully decline." Anastasia's expression didn't change, but Rosalie saw her fingers tighten slightly on the armrest of her chair. "May I ask why, Your Majesty?" "Because I'm already bonded," Angelo said simply, "to Lady Rosalie Ramirez, through a resonance bond that formed during the breaking of my curse. We will formalize this bond at the new moon in a ceremony open to all territories. She will be recognized as my queen, with all the rights and responsibilities that title carries." The explosion of noise was immediate, council members shouting over each other, Patty's warriors bristling with barely contained aggression, Carl's voice rising above the chaos trying to restore order. But through it all, Anastasia remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Angelo with an expression that was becoming increasingly cold. "Your Majesty," Patty said when the noise finally died down, her voice tight with controlled fury. "We had an agreement. We had an offer," Angelo corrected, "which I've declined. The Southern Territories are welcome to negotiate their return to the unified kingdom on other terms. But my bonding is not on the table for discussion." "Then perhaps we should discuss what is on the table," Anastasia said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was cultured, measured, and edged with something dangerous. She stood slowly, her movements deliberate, such as the fact that Lady Rosalie is barren, unable to provide heirs, unable to continue your bloodline, unable to fulfill the most basic requirement of a queen. "My ability to rule has nothing to do with my womb," Rosalie said, her voice steady despite the familiar shame trying to claw its way up her throat. "And Angelo's legacy won't be measured by how many children he produces, but by how he unites the territories and brings peace to the Pax." "Pretty words," Anastasia said dismissively. "But the reality is that a king without heirs creates a succession crisis, creates instability, creates the exact fracturing that Angelo claims to want to prevent." She turned to the council. "Surely you see this. Surely you understand that choosing personal desire over duty is exactly the kind of weakness that led to the territories fracturing in the first place." Several council members nodded, and Rosalie felt a chill run down her spine. Anastasia was good at this, better than Patty even. She knew exactly which arguments would resonate with the males who valued tradition and stability above all else. "The succession can be handled through adoption or designation of an heir from another line," Angelo said. "My great-great-grandmother Imelda ruled for 37 years without a bonded mate, and the territories were more stable under her rule than they've been in a century." "Imelda also didn't have a resonance bond with anyone," Carl interjected. "She remained unbonded by choice, for the sake of her power. You, Your Majesty, are already bonded, which means you're already dividing your power between yourself and Lady Rosalie. Adding a political bond with Anastasia wouldn't diminish you further, it would strengthen your position. It would also be a betrayal," Rosalie said quietly, "of the resonance bond, of the connection we built while breaking the curse, of everything we've promised each other. Is that really what you want, Carl? A king who rules effectively but has no honor? Who breaks vows for political convenience?" "I want a king who puts the territories above his own happiness," Carl said bluntly. "Which is what every ruler must do eventually." Then you want a king who isn't me, Angelo said, his voice hard. Because I refuse to believe that effective leadership requires personal misery. I refuse to accept that I must sacrifice my bond with Rosalie to be a good king. And I absolutely refuse to set a precedent that resonance bonds can be overridden by political pressure. How noble, Anastasia said, and now her mask of patience was starting to crack. How romantic. But nobility doesn't feed the territories, Your Majesty. Romance doesn't prevent wars or settle disputes or create the alliances necessary for lasting peace. Only power does that. Only strategic thinking. Only the willingness to make hard choices. I am making a hard choice, Angelo said. I'm choosing to trust that the territories are strong enough to accept a queen who doesn't fit traditional expectations. I'm choosing to believe that true leadership means being authentic rather than politically convenient. And I'm choosing to honor the bond that saved my life and gave me back my humanity. And if the Southern Territories refuse to rejoin under those conditions, Patty asked, her voice dangerously soft. If we maintain our independence, continue operating as a separate faction. What then, Your Majesty? Angelo's eyes hardened. Then, you'll be declaring yourself in opposition to the Crimson Throne, and I'll have no choice but to treat you as an enemy faction, rather than a wayward territory seeking reconciliation. The threat hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Rosalie felt the tension in the room. Ratchet up another notch. Felt Angelo's warriors, Marcos included, shift into ready positions near the doors. This was balanced on a knife's edge, she realized. One wrong word and it could explode into violence. Perhaps, Carl said quickly, clearly trying to de-escalate, we should take a recess. Allow everyone to cool down and reconsider their positions. Surely there's a compromise that serves everyone's interests. There is no compromise on this, Angelo said firmly. My bonding to Rosalie is final, non-negotiable. The only question is whether the Southern Territories can accept that and move forward, or whether they'll choose continued fracturing over reunification. Anastasia laughed, a cold, brittle sound that made Rosalie's skin crawl. You really believe that, don't you? That your little love story is more important than the stability of thousands of wolves? That your resonance bond, if it even truly exists, justifies putting your own desires above your duty? She turned to Rosalie, and the contempt in her eyes was undisguised. Tell me, Lady Rosalie, what happens when he realizes you're not worth the cost? When the territories descend into chaos because he chose a barren female over political wisdom, will you still be singing your little songs then? Will your bond still feel worth it when wolves are dying because of your selfishness? The words hit like physical blows, each one landing on old wounds that had barely begun to heal. Rosalie felt doubt try to creep back in, felt the familiar shame whispering that maybe Anastasia was right, maybe she was being selfish. Maybe, no. The thought came from Angelo through the bond, fierce and absolute. She's trying to manipulate you, to make you doubt yourself. Don't let her. Rosalie took a deep breath, drawing strength from the connection between them. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. You're wrong about me. About us. About what matters. The territories don't need a queen who can breed heirs. They need a king who leads with integrity and a queen who supports him without compromising who she is. That's what we offer. That's what our bond represents. Your bond represents weakness, Anastasia said coldly. A king too foolish to see past his own desires. A female too broken to accept what she is. And a kingdom that will suffer for both. Something in Angelo's expression shifted. Rosalie felt his rage spike through the bond, felt him reach the end of his patience with Anastasia's insults. But before he could respond, the throne room doors burst open. A messenger stumbled in, bleeding from a gash across his forehead, his clothes torn. Your Majesty, he gasped, the southern border, we're under attack. The room erupted into chaos again. Angelo was on his feet instantly, his voice cutting through the noise. Report. Now. Rogue forces, Your Majesty. At least 50 wolves, maybe more. They're burning villages, killing anyone who resists. The border guards are holding them off, but they're outnumbered 3-1. The messenger swayed, and Milton caught him before he fell. They're asking for you, Your Majesty, demanding you come face them personally, or they'll keep pushing north. Angelo's jaw clenched. How long ago did this start? 2 hours, maybe 3. We got word as fast as we could, but convenient timing, Angelo said softly, his eyes moving to Patty and Anastasia. An attack on the southern border, just as we're discussing the Southern Territory's demands, almost as if someone wanted to demonstrate exactly what would happen if I refused to cooperate. Patty's expression remained carefully neutral, but Anastasia's lips curved into the smallest smile. The Southern Territories have many factions, Your Majesty. Not all of them answer to us. Perhaps if you'd chosen to strengthen your position through alliance rather than sentiment, you'd have the leverage to control such elements. Or perhaps, Rosalie said coldly, you orchestrated this attack to force Angelo's hand, to prove your point about instability while simultaneously threatening him into compliance. That's a serious accusation, Patty said, her voice dangerous. Do you have proof? I don't need proof, Angelo said. I need to protect my people. Marcos, the guard stepped forward immediately. Assemble the guard. We ride for the southern border within the hour. Your Majesty, you can't. Carl started. I can, and I will, Angelo interrupted. My people are under attack. My presence might be what's needed to end this quickly. He turned to Patty and Anastasia. You're both welcome to join us, to help defend territory that's supposed to be under the Crimson Throne's protection. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to stay here while others fight? The challenge was unmistakable. Patty's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. The southern delegation will ride with you. We're not afraid to defend our territories. Excellent, Angelo said. Then his eyes found Rosalie's, and through the bond she felt his request before he voiced it. Rosalie stays here. With a protective detail. This could be a feint, an attempt to draw me away from the fortress. No, Rosalie said immediately. I'm not staying behind while you ride into danger. You don't have combat training, Angelo said, his voice gentle but firm. And if something happens to me, the territories will need you. The bond between us means you're the only one who can speak with my authority if I fall. Don't talk about falling, Rosalie said, fear lancing through her. Don't even think it. Angelo crossed to her, cupping her face in both hands. I'll come back, I promise, but I need to know you're safe. Please, Rosalie, let me protect you this way. Rosalie wanted to argue, wanted to insist on staying by his side, but she could feel through the bond how important this was to him. Not just her safety, but his ability to focus on the battle without constantly worrying about her. And she understood, in that moment, that partnership sometimes meant trusting the other person to handle things alone. Come back to me, she whispered. That's not a request, it's an order from your future queen. Angelo's smile was fierce and beautiful. Yes, ma'am. He kissed her, quick and hard, then turned to Marcos. 20 guards stay with Rosalie. No one, and I mean no one, gets near her without her explicit permission. Understood? Understood, Your Majesty. The next hour was a blur of controlled chaos. Warriors arming themselves, horses being saddled, supplies being gathered for rapid deployment. Rosalie watched from the fortress steps as Angelo led his forces out, a formidable sight in his armor with his sword at his side. Patty and Anastasia rode with the southern delegation just behind him, and Rosalie couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with this entire situation. It's too convenient, she said to Marcos, who'd stayed behind as head of her protective detail. The timing, the demands, the way Anastasia smiled when the messenger arrived. This is a trap. I think so too, Marcos agreed grimly. But what kind of trap? And for whom? They got their answer 3 hours later. A second messenger arrived, this one from the opposite direction, the northern border, and his news made Rosalie's blood run cold. Rogue forces on the northern border as well, the messenger reported. At least 100 wolves, possibly more. They're not attacking yet. Just positioning themselves. Waiting for something. They're boxing us in. Rosalie realized with growing horror. The southern attack was a diversion. They drew Angelo and most of the guard away, and now they're positioning forces on the northern border too. She stopped, her eyes widening. To attack the fortress. They're going to attack while Angelo is gone and the defenses are weakened. Marcos swore viciously. We need to recall the king immediately. There's no time, Rosalie said, her mind racing. Even if we sent a messenger now, it would take hours for Angelo to get back. The northern forces will attack long before then. She turned to Marcos, her expression hardening with decision. How many guards do we have? 20 here with you. Another 30 scattered throughout the fortress and immediate grounds. Maybe 50 total, including servants who can fight if necessary. Against 100 trained warriors. Rosalie's hands clenched into fists. We're outnumbered 2 to 1. We can barricade the main gates, Marcos said. Hold them off until the king returns. The fortress is defensible, it was built to withstand sieges. But Rosalie was already shaking her head, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. No, we don't defend, we distract. What? They're coming for the fortress because they think it's vulnerable, Rosalie said, speaking quickly. Because Angelo is gone and there's minimal defense. But what if we make them rethink that assessment? What if we make them believe the fortress is more protected than it actually is? How? Marcos asked, though understanding was starting to dawn in his eyes. Rosalie pulled her mother's journal from her pocket, flipping to the pages about the Song of Binding. The song has power, Marcos. Real, tangible power. Angelo and I used it to break a curse that 17 females died attempting. What if we could use it to create an illusion? To make 100 warriors think twice about attacking? You want to sing? Marcos looked skeptical. Lady Rosalie, I respect what you and the king accomplished. But one voice against 100 warriors. Not one voice, Rosalie interrupted. Many voices. The song was passed down through my bloodline, yes, but the melody itself is simple. Anyone can learn it. And if enough people sing it together, if we create a harmony that echoes through the valley. She met Marcos's eyes. What if we could make them believe this fortress is protected by something ancient and powerful, something they don't want to face? Marcos stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he smiled. You know what? Angelo was right about you. You really are worth fighting for. He turned to the assembled guards. Gather everyone who can hold a tune. Servants, guards, anyone. We have maybe an hour to learn a song that might save all our lives. You're actually going to do this? One of the younger guards, Eric, asked incredulously. Do you have a better plan? Marcos shot back. Eric grinned. Not even slightly. Let's sing these bastards back to whatever hole they crawled out of. The next hour was organized chaos. Rosalie gathered everyone she could find. Guards, servants, even the elderly cook named Thelma, who'd been with the fortress for 40 years. She taught them the basic melody of her mother's lullaby, the shield song that had anchored Angelo during his transformations. It was simpler than the full harmony she and Angelo created together, but it was powerful in its own right. And when 50 voices sang it together, even without Angelo's sword harmony to complete it, the effect was remarkable. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy. The stones of the fortress hummed with resonance, and the valley below echoed with a sound that was part music, part magic, part something older and more primal than either. They're coming, a guard called from the walls. I can see them approaching from the north. At least 100. Just like the messenger said. Positions, Marcos ordered. Then to Rosalie, when I give the signal, you start. Everyone else will follow your lead. Rosalie moved to the highest point of the fortress walls, where her voice would carry the furthest. Below, she could see the rogue forces approaching, a massive wave of wolves, in both human and shifted forms, weapons glinting in the afternoon sun. They moved with the confidence of warriors who expected easy victory. They were about to be very surprised. Now, Marcos shouted. Rosalie opened her mouth and sang. The shield song poured out of her, stronger than it had ever been, amplified by the desperation of the moment and the fierce need to protect what Angelo had built. Behind her, 50 other voices joined in, guards who'd served Angelo for years, servants who'd watched him suffer through the curse, people who'd made this fortress their home and refused to let it fall. The harmony wasn't perfect. Some voices were off-key. Some came in at the wrong moment. But the sheer number of them, the unified intent behind them, created something powerful. The song rolled down the mountainside like a wave of sound, crashing into the approaching rogues with physical force. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The rogues stumbled, their advance faltering. Several wolves in their shifted forms yelped and retreated. Even the humans looked shaken, their confident expressions replaced by confusion and unease. The song wrapped around them, through them, making them feel things they didn't want to feel: doubt, fear, the sense that they were facing something far beyond their understanding. "Keep singing," Rosalie shouted between verses. "Don't stop." They sang through the afternoon, their voices growing hoarse but never faltering. The rogues tried 3 times to advance, and each time the song pushed them back, creating a barrier of sound and power that they couldn't penetrate. By the time the sun began to set, the rogues were in full retreat, their formation broken, their confidence shattered. A cheer went up from the fortress defenders, but Rosalie felt nothing but exhaustion. Her throat was raw, her body shaking from the effort of maintaining the song for hours. But they'd done it. 50 defenders against 100 attackers, and they'd won without shedding a single drop of blood. "He's coming back," Marcos said, and Rosalie felt it too through the bond, Angelo's presence growing stronger as he rode at full speed toward the fortress. She could feel his rage, his fear for her safety, his desperate need to make sure she was all right. When he finally burst through the gates an hour later, his armor splattered with blood from the southern border skirmish, his first action was to sweep Rosalie into his arms and hold her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You sang," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I felt it through the bond, felt your power, your strength. You defended the fortress. You protected our home. We protected it together," Rosalie said, pulling back to look at him. "Your guards, your servants, everyone who believes in what you're building here. We sang your mother's song and mine together, and it was enough." Angelo kissed her then, desperate and relieved and full of pride that made the resonance bond sing with golden warmth. When they finally broke apart, he turned to address the assembled defenders. "What you did today will be remembered for generations," he said, his voice carrying to everyone present. "You proved that strength doesn't always come from swords and shields. Sometimes it comes from voices raised together, from unity in the face of overwhelming odds, from the courage to stand and defend even when retreat would be easier." His eyes found Rosalie's. "And you proved that the queen I've chosen is exactly who this kingdom needs. Someone who leads through inspiration rather than intimidation. Someone who turns 50 defenders into a force that can repel 100 attackers." The cheers that erupted were deafening. Even the guards who'd been skeptical about Rosalie, who'd questioned whether a Barren female could truly be queen, were shouting her name with genuine respect and admiration. "The southern attack?" Rosalie asked quietly as the celebration continued around them. Angelo's expression darkened. "Rogues bought and paid for by someone in the southern territories. We captured several alive, and they confirmed it." Patty claimed ignorance, but Anastasia, he shook his head. "She disappeared during the fighting. Slipped away while we were engaged. I think she orchestrated the whole thing, both attacks. The timing. Everything. An attempt to prove her point about my choice of queen creating instability. Instead, we proved the opposite," Rosalie said. "Instead, you proved the opposite," Angelo corrected. He cupped her face in both hands, his dark eyes intense. "No more doubts, Rosalie. No more questioning whether you're enough. Today you defended a fortress with nothing but your voice and your courage. You led 50 people against 100 attackers and won. If that's not worthy of being queen, then I don't know what is." Rosalie felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears, the kind that came from finally, truly believing that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly what Angelo said she was, enough. "The new moon is in 3 days, she said. Are we really doing this? Bonding publicly, making me queen, daring the territories to object." Angelo's smile was fierce and beautiful and absolutely certain. "We're really doing this. No more political games. No more letting people like Carl and Patty dictate our choices. We're bonding at the new moon. And anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with the queen who just defended my fortress against impossible odds." "I like the sound of that," Rosalie said. "So do I," Angelo agreed. They stood on the fortress walls as the sun set, watching the last of the rogue forces retreat into the distance. The resonance bond hummed between them, golden and warm and unshakable. They'd survived attacks from without and manipulation from within. They'd proven their bond was stronger than political pressure, and their combined power was greater than their enemies expected. Now came the final step. Making it official. 3 days until the new moon. 3 days until Rosalie Ramirez became queen. 3 days until they proved, once and for all, that love and duty weren't opposing forces. They were two verses of the same song, meant to be sung together. Epilogue. The legacy that had nothing to do with bloodlines. The evening light filtered through the windows of the royal chambers, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Rosalie sat in the window seat that had become her favorite spot in the entire fortress. A place where she could see the valley below, and watch the territories that had slowly, steadily, begun to heal under Angelo's renewed leadership. She was humming, not consciously, not with any particular intent. But the melody rose from her naturally now, her mother's lullaby, the shield song that had saved Angelo's life and defended the fortress, and become something of an anthem among the people who'd witnessed its power. It was as much a part of her as breathing, a constant companion that reminded her of where she'd come from and what she'd survived. The door opened, and Angelo entered, still wearing his council robes from the afternoon session. But the moment he heard her humming, his expression softened, and he joined the melody without missing a beat, his deeper voice harmonizing with hers, the sword to her shield, creating that perfect resonance that still made her skin tingle with awareness even after 6 months of marriage. Long day? Rosalie asked when the verse ended. Productive day, Angelo corrected, crossing to join her at the window. He settled beside her, pulling her against his side in a gesture that had become as natural as the song itself. The Western territories formally agreed to the new trade routes. The Eastern pacts sent confirmation that they'll attend the Unity Summit next month. And Carl actually smiled during the council meeting, which I'm choosing to interpret as progress. Rosalie laughed. Carl smiling. Are we sure he's feeling well? I think he's finally accepting that maybe, just maybe, our bonding didn't doom the territories to chaos and fracture. Angelo pressed a kiss to her temple. In fact, I believe his exact words were, Your Majesty's choice of queen has proven remarkably effective at inspiring loyalty and cooperation. Which is Carl speak for. I was wrong and you were right. I'll take it, Rosalie said, snuggling closer. Through the resonance bond, she could feel Angelo's satisfaction, his quiet pride in what they'd built together over the past 6 months. It hadn't been easy. There had been territories that refused to acknowledge her as queen, pacts that tested their borders, looking for weakness, political factions that tried to exploit her inability to provide heirs as evidence of instability. But slowly, steadily, they'd won over the doubters, not through force or manipulation, but through consistent leadership and the undeniable proof that their bond made them both stronger, not weaker. The territories that accepted Rosalie's queenship found their disputes resolved fairly, their trade protected, their voices heard in ways they hadn't been in years. And the territories that continued to resist found themselves increasingly isolated, watching as others prospered under the renewed unity of the Crimson Throne. How many are coming to the summit? Rosalie asked. 43 territories have confirmed attendance, Angelo said, and she could hear the wonder in his voice. 43. Rosalie, that's more than have gathered in one place since before my father's death. If we can get them all in the same room, actually talking to each other, instead of through intermediaries, he trailed off, but she could feel his hope through the bond. We will, Rosalie said with certainty. Because they're not coming to see the Alphaking who was cursed for 3 years. They're coming to see the king who broke that curse, and the queen who defended his fortress with nothing but her voice. They're coming because they want to believe unity is possible again. They're coming because of you, Angelo murmured. Because the story of the Barren queen who led 50 defenders against 100 attackers has spread across every territory. Because you've proven that strength comes in forms people didn't expect, and that's made them reconsider a lot of their assumptions about power and leadership. Rosalie felt a familiar warmth bloom in her chest, not quite pride, but something close to it. Acceptance. Maybe. The slow, steady acceptance that she was exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, regardless of what her womb could or couldn't provide. Speaking of unexpected things, Angelo said, reaching into his robe and pulling out a sealed letter. This arrived this afternoon. From your sister. Rosalie's breath caught. She hadn't heard from Tracy since before the bonding ceremony. Hadn't known if her sister had even heard about her becoming queen. She took the letter with shaking hands and broke the seal. Dearest Rosalie, I'm sorry it's taken me so long to write. The truth is, I didn't know what to say. How do you apologize to your sister for not fighting harder for her? For letting the pack cast her out without standing up and saying, "No, this is wrong, she deserves better"? But then I heard the stories. About the cursed king and the barren female who broke his curse. About the resonance bond and the fortress defense, and the queen who leads with her voice instead of her bloodline. And I realized you didn't need me to fight for you. You were always strong enough to fight for yourself. I'm writing because I want you to know I'm proud of you. Prouder than I have words for. And because I want to ask beg for your forgiveness for all the years I let you believe you were less than what you are. My mate and I, we've been talking. About the pack, about Keith and his leadership, about the way they treated you. We've decided to leave. To find a new pack, one that values wolves for more than their ability to breed. The boys are old enough to understand now, and they deserve to grow up knowing their aunt is a queen. That being different doesn't mean being broken. If you'll have us, we'd like to come to the Crimson Throne. To pledge our loyalty to you and King Angelo. To be part of what you're building there. I understand if you say no. I understand if the wound is too deep. If too much time has passed. But I had to ask. Had to try. Your sister, always, Tracy. Rosalie read the letter twice. Then a third time, tears streaming down her face. Angelo wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she cried not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of a wound she hadn't realized was still bleeding, finally beginning to heal. "What do you want to do?" Angelo asked gently when her tears finally slowed. "I want." Rosalie took a shaky breath. "I want to say yes. I want my sister here. I want my nephews to know me. To grow up in a place where they'll learn that value comes from who you are, not what you can produce. I want." She stopped, pressing her face against Angelo's chest. "Is that selfish, after everything that happened?" "It's not selfish to want your family," Angelo said firmly. "And Tracy is right, she should have fought harder for you. But she's fighting now. She's making the hard choice to leave her pack. To uproot her entire family. To come here and pledge loyalty to the sister the pack rejected. That takes courage, Rosalie. Maybe not as much courage as you've shown, but it's still worth something." "Then I'll write back," Rosalie decided. "Tell her yes. Tell her they're welcome here. Tell her." She paused, searching for the right words. "Tell her that healing doesn't require forgetting, but it does require moving forward, and I'm ready to move forward." Angelo kissed the top of her head. "I'll have Marcos prepare chambers for them, a suite in the family wing, close to ours. And I'll make sure the boys are enrolled in the fortress school with the other children." "The fortress school that didn't exist 6 months ago," Rosalie said with a watery laugh. "The one you created because I mentioned wanting to teach the servants' children to read. The one that now serves 70 children from across the territories," Angelo corrected, "and has a waiting list twice that long. See, your ideas have a way of growing into something bigger than either of us expects." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Through the window, Rosalie could see people moving through the fortress grounds, guards changing shifts, servants finishing their daily tasks, children playing in the courtyard that Angelo had designated as a safe space for families. The fortress felt alive in a way it hadn't when she'd first arrived 6 months ago, when it had been more tomb than home, more prison than palace. "I've been thinking," Angelo said eventually, his tone careful in a way that suggested he'd been working up to this. "About succession. About the council's concerns regarding heirs." Rosalie stiffened slightly. "Angelo." "Wait, let me finish." He shifted so he could look at her properly. "I know we've said we'll adopt when the time is right, or designate an heir from another line, but I want to do something more than that. I want to change the succession laws entirely." Rosalie blinked. "What?" "The current laws say the throne passes through blood eldest child, or failing that, closest blood relative, but that system only works if you believe power comes from bloodlines. If you believe genetics matter more than capability." Angelo's dark eyes were intense. "I don't believe that, Rosalie. I don't believe my ability to rule came from my father's blood. It came from the training he gave me, the values he instilled, the example he set, and if that's true, then why shouldn't we pass the throne to someone we train? Someone we choose not because of their genetics, but because of their character and strength and leadership potential." You want to create a meritocracy, Rosalie said slowly, understanding dawning. Choose our heir based on who's actually best suited to rule, not who happens to carry our blood. Exactly. Angelo's voice grew more animated. We could establish a system where potential heirs adopted children, promising young leaders from various territories. Even common-born wolves who show exceptional ability undergo training from a young age. Learn governance, diplomacy, combat, everything needed to rule effectively. And then when the time comes, we designate the most qualified as heir, regardless of bloodline. The council will fight you on this, Rosalie warned. Carl especially. He's traditional to his core. Let them fight, Angelo said with a grin that was sharp and dangerous. I'm the Alphaking who broke a supposedly unbreakable curse and bonded with a Barren queen. If I can do that, I can certainly convince a council that bloodlines are overrated. Rosalie laughed despite herself. You make it sound so simple. It won't be simple, but it'll be right. Angelo took her hands in his. And it'll be our legacy, not children of our bodies, but something potentially more important, a system that values ability over birth, that gives every wolf a chance to prove their worth regardless of who their parents were. Imagine what that could mean for the territories, Rosalie. How many talented wolves are currently overlooked because they weren't born into the right families? Rosalie thought about her own experience, rejected, not because she was incapable or unworthy, but because her womb was empty. Thought about all the other wolves who'd been dismissed for reasons beyond their control, their potential wasted because they didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of valuable. It could change everything, she said quietly. It will change everything, Angelo corrected. But we have to be the ones to start it. We have to be willing to look at the old systems and say, no, there's a better way. Just like you did when you chose to face a cursed king, instead of accepting exile. Just like I did when I chose to bond with you instead of bonding politically. So we're revolutionaries now? Rosalie asked, a smile tugging at her lips. We've been revolutionaries since the moment you sang in my throne room, Angelo said. We just keep finding new systems to revolutionize. A knock at the door interrupted them. Enter, Angelo called. Marcos stepped in, looking apologetic. Apologies for the interruption, Your Majesties. But there's someone at the gates asking for an audience. Dennis Pope and Daryl Fitzpatrick, the bounty hunters who originally brought Lady Rosalie to the fortress. Rosalie sat up straight. Dennis and Daryl? What are they doing here? They say they have news, Marcos said. And a request. They wouldn't elaborate, but Dennis said to tell you that it concerns others like Lady Rosalie, other rejected wolves who might benefit from what you've built here. Rosalie and Angelo exchanged glances. Through the bond, she felt his curiosity mirror her own. Send them in, Angelo said. We'll meet them in the informal receiving room. And Marcos? Have the kitchen send up food and drink. If they've traveled from far, they'll be hungry. 20 minutes later, Rosalie and Angelo sat across from the two bounty hunters who'd guided her to the Crimson Throne 6 months ago. They looked travel-worn but healthy, and there was something different in the way they carried themselves, less cynical, more purposeful. Your Majesties, Dennis said, bowing with genuine respect. Thank you for seeing us. Of course, Rosalie said warmly. You brought me here safely. That deserves more than just a brief audience. What can we do for you? Dennis and Daryl exchanged glances. It's more what we can do for you, Daryl said. See, words spread across the territories about what happened here. About the cursed king and the Barren queen. About the resonance bond and the fortress defense. And that's inspired questions. From wolves who thought they had no place, no value. Wolves who've been rejected or cast out for reasons that have nothing to do with their actual worth. We've encountered at least a dozen in the past few months, Dennis continued. Females deemed too old for bonding. Males injured in combat who can no longer fight as they used to. Children born with differences that made their packs uncomfortable. All of them hearing about you, Your Majesty, he nodded to Rosalie, and wondering if maybe there's a place for them too. A place where they'd be valued for what they can do rather than judged for what they can't. Rosalie felt something catch in her throat. You want us to take them in? We want you to do what you've already started doing, Dennis said. Building a place where wolves are valued for their character and capability, rather than their bloodlines or their conformity to tradition. You've already got the school for children, the guard that accepts wolves from any territory, the council positions that Angelo's been filling based on merit rather than birth. He leaned forward. Why not formalize it? Create a formal policy that the Crimson Throne welcomes wolves who've been rejected elsewhere. Make this the place where second chances actually exist. It would send a powerful message, Daryl added. About what kind of kingdom you're building. About what kind of values you represent. Angelo was silent for a long moment, his face thoughtful. Through the bond, Rosalie felt him working through the implications, the political ramifications, the practical considerations, the resources that would be required. But beneath all of that, she felt his fundamental agreement with the idea. His recognition that this was exactly the kind of legacy they'd just been discussing. We'd need to establish proper systems, Angelo said finally. Housing, job placement, integration programs to help newcomers adjust. We can't just open the gates and hope for the best. We'd need to vet people carefully, Rosalie added. Make sure we're not inadvertently welcoming wolves who were rejected for legitimate reasons, violence, criminality, behavior that would endanger others. But if we do it right, Angelo continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. If we create proper structures and support systems, this could be exactly what the territories need. A living demonstration that value comes from within, not from bloodlines or traditional standards. A place where every wolf gets a fair chance to prove themselves. So that's a yes? Dennis asked, a smile spreading across his weathered face. That's a yes. Angelo confirmed. We'll need your help, though. You and Daryl know the territories. Know the hidden populations of rejected wolves. We'll need guides, scouts, people who can spread the word that the Crimson Throne is open to those who need it. We can do that, Daryl said eagerly. Been thinking about giving up the bounty hunting business anyway. This seems like better work, more meaningful. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, plans, implementation strategies. By the time Dennis and Daryl left with promises to return within the month with the first group of rejected wolves seeking sanctuary, Rosalie's head was spinning with possibilities. We're really doing this, she said, as she and Angelo prepared for bed later that night. Opening the fortress to every rejected wolf in the territories. Creating a sanctuary for the unwanted. We're creating more than a sanctuary, Angelo corrected, pulling her close. We're creating proof that the old systems are broken, that there's a better way. And we're doing it because you survived being rejected and became a queen, which means there are probably dozens, hundreds of other wolves out there with similar potential that's being wasted. Rosalie rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the resonance bond pulse with golden warmth between them. My mother would have loved this, she said softly, seeing what her song accomplished, knowing that breaking your curse was just the beginning. She knew, Angelo said with certainty. That's why she sent you here. Not just to break the curse, but to start something bigger, to prove that being different doesn't mean being broken, and that sometimes the wolves everyone else overlooks are exactly the ones who change the world. 3 months later, the Great Hall was packed to capacity for the first official Unity Summit in over a decade. Representatives from 47 territories filled the long tables, more than had confirmed attendance, more than Angelo had dared hope for. The air hummed with conversation, with negotiation, with the careful dance of politics that was slowly, steadily rebuilding connections between packs that had been fractured for too long. But it was the smaller ceremony happening before the summit that meant the most to Rosalie. She stood at the front of the hall with Angelo beside her, watching as 12 wolves stepped forward, the first official group of rejected wolves to be formally welcomed into the Crimson Throne's protection. There was Elma, a female in her 40s who'd been cast out when she could no longer bear children. Jean, a male who'd lost his arm in combat and been deemed useless by his former pack. Glenda, a child born with a twisted leg who walked with a pronounced limp, and 9 others, each with their own story of rejection, each looking at Rosalie and Angelo with expressions that mixed hope with disbelief. You come here having been told you are broken, Angelo said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. Having been cast out, rejected, deemed less than. But I stand before you as a king who was cursed for 3 years and told he would never be whole again. And beside me stands a queen who was rejected 3 times for being barren, who was told she had no value because her womb was empty. He reached for Rosalie's hand, and she squeezed it tightly, drawing strength from the contact, from the bond that hummed between them. "We are proof," Rosalie continued, "that being different does not mean being broken. That value comes from character and courage, and the willingness to keep fighting even when the world tells you you're worthless. Each of you has that value. Each of you has potential that your former packs couldn't see. And we're honored, truly honored, to welcome you into our home and help you discover exactly how strong you are." She pulled out a small wooden box, opening it to reveal 12 pendants, each one carved with the symbol of the Crimson Throne intertwined with a musical note, representing both Angelo's authority and the song that had brought them together. One by one, she placed the pendants around each newcomer's neck, a physical symbol of their acceptance, their place, their worth. When she reached the last one, a young male named Lucas, who'd been rejected for being too small, too weak to be useful in combat, he looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this for us? We're nobody. We have nothing to offer." Rosalie knelt so she was at his eye level, mindful of the entire hall watching this moment. "You're wrong about that, Lucas. You have everything to offer. Your survival is proof of your strength. Your willingness to come here, to try again despite all the rejections you've faced, that's courage. And this kingdom needs courage more than it needs anything else." She placed the pendant around his neck, and Lucas threw his arms around her, sobbing openly. Rosalie held him, let him cry out years of pain and rejection and loneliness, and when she looked up, she saw that half the hall was in tears, including several of the hard-bitten territorial representatives who'd probably never cried in public before. That night, after the ceremony and the summit sessions and the endless rounds of negotiation and diplomacy, Rosalie and Angelo finally retreated to their chambers. They were exhausted, wrung out from the emotional intensity of the day, but also satisfied in a way that went deeper than any political victory could provide. 12 wolves, Rosalie said, collapsing onto their bed. 12 lives that might have been wasted if Dennis and Daryl hadn't found them. If we hadn't opened the fortress. If we hadn't been willing to see value where others saw only weakness. 12 now, Angelo said, settling beside her. But Dennis says there are at least 50 more waiting for the next group. And as word spreads, as the rejected wolves tell their stories to others who need to hear them. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. This was just the beginning. Rosalie turned to face him, studying the man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word. The curse was long gone, but traces of what he'd survived still lingered in the shadows beneath his eyes, the occasional wariness in his expression when he was caught off guard. Just as her own scars from 12 years of rejection still made her doubt sometimes, still whispered that she wasn't enough despite all evidence to the contrary. But they'd learned to lean on each other in those moments. To use the resonance bond to remind each other of their worth when they forgot. To sing together when the darkness threatened to overwhelm them individually. "Sing with me?" she asked softly. Angelo didn't question, didn't ask why. He just opened his mouth and began humming the melody, his mother's sword song, the harmony that completed Rosalie's shield. She joined in, and their voices wove together in the pattern that had become as natural as breathing, creating that golden resonance that pulsed through the room like a living thing. They sang the lullaby that had saved Angelo's life and defended the fortress and become the anthem of rejected wolves seeking sanctuary. They sang it not because they needed to, but because they wanted to, because the song had become more than just a tool or a weapon. It had become a celebration, a reminder, a promise that they'd keep building this new world together, one rejected wolf at a time, one revolutionary idea at a time, one verse at a time. When the final note faded into silence, Angelo pulled Rosalie close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I love you," he said. "I love the life we're building. I love the kingdom we're creating. I love every impossibility we've achieved, and every impossibility we haven't even dreamed of yet. I love you too," Rosalie whispered. "My sword, my king, my home." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other and the resonance bond, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd found their purpose. Not in bloodlines or heirs or meeting traditional expectations, but in breaking down walls and building bridges, and proving that the wolves everyone else overlooked were often the ones who changed the world. Outside their window, the moon rose over the Crimson Throne, not full, not new but something in between, waxing, growing, becoming more than it had been, just like the kingdom, just like the rejected wolves finding sanctuary, just like the barren queen and the cursed king who'd learned that wholeness didn't come from being perfect. It came from being exactly who you were, scars and all, and finding someone who saw those scars and loved you not despite them, but because of everything you'd survived to earn them. The song had ended, but the melody would continue, carried forward by every wolf who learned it, every child who sang it, every rejected soul who heard it and realized that maybe, just maybe, they weren't broken after all. They were just waiting for someone to teach them the harmony,